In today's overwhelming world, many people carry heavy thoughts, restless emotions, and tired bodies. But the ancient teachings of the Buddha offer something deeply comforting, a quiet wisdom that brings healing from within. These Buddhist insights, shared with kindness and clarity, can help calm the heart, ease mental burdens, and guide the mind into peace. Each gentle teaching reminds us that deep rest doesn't begin on the outside. It begins in the stillness of awareness. Through this collection, healing feels possible, sleep becomes easier, and a deeper sense of inner peace begins to grow, one breath at a time. The wound is not the enemy. It is the doorway. Long ago, in a quiet monastery at the edge of a mountain forest, a young monk carried a deep pain in his heart. He had once lived as a wealthy man, full of pride and ambition, but he had lost everything: his home, his status, his family. When he joined the monastery, he hoped to leave his sorrow behind. But every night, memories returned. Regret clung to him like a shadow. He tried to silence it with meditation, with chanting, with discipline, but nothing worked. He began to think that something inside him was broken beyond repair. One evening, as he sat alone by a flickering oil lamp, the old abbot of the monastery quietly joined him. The abbot had seen the heaviness in the young monk's posture, the way his eyes looked far away, as if still living in a life that no longer existed. The abbot said nothing at first. He simply took out a clay bowl and dropped it onto the stone floor. It cracked down the middle. Then, gently, he began filling the crack with gold dust and sap, sealing it slowly with care. The young monk watched in silence, confused. "Why did you break the bowl?" he finally asked. The abbot looked at him and said softly, "I did not break it. I revealed where the gold should go." That night, something shifted. The young monk sat with his sorrow, not as an enemy, but as a teacher. He saw how loss had stripped away his arrogance. He saw how pain had opened his heart to the suffering of others. He realized he could comfort other monks because he understood despair, that his wound had become the source of his compassion. From that day forward, he no longer tried to push the pain away. He welcomed it like an old friend, not because he enjoyed it, but because it had shown him who he really was. The wound had not destroyed him. It had carved a doorway to wisdom, humility, and love. Pain, when met with presence, becomes something sacred. Not a curse, but a quiet invitation to go deeper, to love more, and to live from the truth beneath the surface. Sleep begins where control ends. In a hilltop monastery overlooking rice fields that shimmered like mirrors under moonlight, a novice monk struggled each night to fall asleep. No matter how many deep breaths he took, or how long he meditated before bed, his mind would not stop spinning. He replayed conversations, worried about his progress, and tried to control his thoughts with effort so rigid it left his body tense and his chest tight. Sleep became another goal to chase, another achievement to reach. But the more he tried to command it, the farther it drifted. Noticing the dark circles under his eyes, the elder monk invited him one evening to the monastery's meditation hall. The room was empty, lit by a single candle. The elder handed the novice a small bowl filled to the brim with water and asked him to walk across the room without spilling a single drop. Determined to do it perfectly, the novice took one careful step after another. His muscles locked, his focus narrowed to a single drop trembling at the rim of the bowl. Halfway through the room, his foot caught slightly, and water spilled. He looked up in defeat, but the elder smiled. "This is how you treat sleep," he said. "You hold it like a bowl too full, gripped with fear that something will spill. But sleep is not a task. It is the release of all tasks." The words struck something deep inside. That night, the novice lay down, and instead of trying to sleep, he simply watched the breath come and go. He let the thoughts rise and fall without chasing them or pushing them away. He softened his grip on the moment. He stopped trying to control the silence, and somewhere in that surrender, sleep arrived, quietly, without effort, like a breeze entering an open window. In Buddhist wisdom, rest does not come from perfect posture or mental control. It comes when striving falls away. The mind does not need to be forced into stillness. It needs to be allowed. When the hands of the mind stop clenching, peace slips in like moonlight across still water. Control cannot carry us to sleep. Only surrender can. Let your breath be the prayer that asks for nothing. There was once a monk known for his long, elaborate prayers. Every morning before the sun rose, and every evening long after the stars came out, he would be found in the temple courtyard, chanting verses, reciting sutras, asking for clarity, strength, and peace. Other monks admired his discipline, but they also noticed something. The monk was never at ease. His brow stayed furrowed. His steps were quick and restless. Despite all his praying, he seemed far from calm. One day, an old wandering teacher visited the monastery. The teacher sat quietly beneath a Bodhi tree, barely speaking, doing nothing but breathing slowly, deeply in, gently out. The monk, curious, approached him and asked, "What do you pray for?" The teacher opened his eyes and smiled. "I don't pray for anything. I let my breath be the prayer." The monk was confused. "But what do you ask when you breathe?" The teacher answered, "Nothing. I ask for nothing, and in that I receive everything." That night, the monk tried something new. He left his chanting beads beside his mat. He didn't recite. He didn't beg for peace. He simply breathed. He listened to the inhale like a river entering the shore. He let the exhale go like a leaf floating downstream. For the first time, he felt space inside his chest, not filled with words, but with silence, not full of longing, but of presence. And something happened. The restlessness eased. The striving fell away. The moment opened. The Buddha often reminded his disciples that clinging, even to spiritual goals, can become a chain. When the breath becomes a tool to get somewhere, the present moment is lost. But when the breath is received without demand, it becomes sacred, a pure gesture of being. To let the breath be the prayer that asks for nothing is to surrender control, to trust the moment, and to honor life as it is. Each breath becomes an act of faith, not in a result, but in presence itself. The inhale whispers, "I am here." The exhale replies, "That is enough." And without trying, the body softens, the mind stills, and peace gently descends. What is held tightly cannot heal. In a monastery nestled at the edge of a dense forest, a young monk walked with a constant limp. Years earlier, he had injured his foot during a heavy storm, slipping on wet stones while gathering firewood for the temple. Though the wound had long closed on the outside, pain still lived deep within. Every step reminded him of it. He often clenched his jaw, trying to ignore it, refusing help, pushing forward in silence. "It's nothing," he would say. "I'm strong enough to bear it." The head monk noticed the way the young man walked, not just with pain, but with resistance. So one evening, as the sun dipped low and the bell for evening meditation echoed across the hills, the head monk asked the younger one to bring him a rock from the riverbed. "Hold it tightly," he instructed, as if it were the most precious thing in the world. The young monk obeyed. The rock was heavy and jagged, and as minutes passed, his hand began to ache. After a while, the elder said, "Now, heal it." Confused, the young monk stood frozen. "How can I heal it while holding it so tightly?" The elder simply nodded. In that moment, the young monk understood. His limp wasn't just from the injury. It was from the way he carried it, from the way he clung to it, resisted it, wrapped his identity around it. The wound had become a part of his pride, a badge of quiet suffering he refused to release. He had never truly let go of the pain, not in his body and not in his heart. That night, during meditation, he placed his attention not on fighting the discomfort, but on softening into it. He breathed into the ache. He allowed it to be there, without resistance, without story. And slowly, something shifted. Not a cure, but a loosening, a quiet uncoiling inside his chest. The Buddha taught that clinging, even to pain, prevents transformation. What is gripped too tightly cannot breathe, cannot move, cannot change. Healing requires openness, softness, the willingness to feel without defense, to let go of the story about the pain and allow the pain itself to speak, then dissolve. True healing is not in the effort to hold it all together. It is in the gentle surrender of what no longer serves. Pain loses its grip when watched with love. In the cool, early mornings of a forest monastery, a young nun would sit perfectly still on her meditation cushion, her back straight, her breath steady, but her heart full of ache. She did not speak much of it to the others, but inside there was an old pain she could not escape. A memory of betrayal from her past, of someone she once trusted deeply. It wasn't just the event, it was the echo. It returned in stillness, like a whisper that never left. Each time she sat in silence, the wound opened again, and she met it with the same thing she always had: judgment. "I should be over this," she told herself. "This pain makes me weak." The pain did not fade. In fact, it grew heavier the more she resisted it. One day, an elderly nun who had watched her closely invited her for tea beneath the plum trees. Without asking what was wrong, she told a story. She spoke of a time when she too carried a sharp sorrow in her chest, a grief that would not leave. "I tried to bury it beneath discipline. I tried to burn it away with effort," she said, "but it only softened when I looked at it as I would a crying child." The younger nun's eyes welled with tears. No one had ever told her it was okay to love her pain. That night, during sitting meditation, she tried something different. When the ache returned, as it always did, she didn't fight it. She didn't push it down or try to fix it. Instead, she breathed into it. She placed her palm softly over her chest and whispered inwardly, "It's okay. I'm here." For the first time, the pain didn't tighten. It trembled and softened. The Buddha taught that mindfulness is not cold observation. It is awareness infused with warmth. When pain is met with judgment, it hides. When it's met with fear, it hardens. But when it's met with loving attention, when it is watched with the tenderness of compassion, it begins to loosen, like a clenched fist that no longer needs to fight. Pain cannot survive in the light of love. It may linger, it may weep, but its grip loosens. Because love does not try to fix the pain, it simply refuses to abandon it, and in that refusal, healing begins. Stillness is not found, it is remembered. In a quiet valley, far from the sound of roads and voices, a monastery stood surrounded by tall trees and slow-moving clouds. One young monk who lived there was obsessed with the idea of finding inner stillness. He believed it was a treasure buried somewhere in silence, something he had to chase, earn, or unlock. He sat for hours in meditation, straining to silence his thoughts, forcing his body into perfect posture, scolding himself every time a bird chirped or a memory surfaced. "Why can't I find peace?" he whispered one night, frustrated and exhausted. The next morning, the abbot invited him for a walk through the forest. They strolled without speaking, just the crunch of leaves underfoot and the occasional rustle of wind. Eventually, they came to a small pond, untouched and glassy. The abbot picked up a stick and stirred the surface, turning it murky and chaotic. "This is your mind," he said. "You keep poking it, hoping to make it still, but stillness does not respond to pressure." Then he placed the stick on the ground and sat beside the monk. Minutes passed, the water settled, ripples smoothed, the pond returned to silence, not because they tried, but because they stopped trying. The abbot turned to him and said, "You were not born restless. You were born quiet. Stillness isn't a new thing to learn. It's something your heart already knows. It's the ground beneath all the noise. You don't need to create it. You just need to remember it." That night, the young monk sat on his mat, not to capture peace, but to return to it. He didn't chase quiet. He let it rise. He watched his breath without chasing the end of it. He allowed his thoughts to pass like clouds, not enemies. And beneath the motion, he began to feel it. Not a reward, but a return, a remembering, as if his mind had simply wandered away from home and now, without judgment, was finding its way back. Buddhist wisdom reminds us that the search for peace can itself be a noise. The more we seek it like a possession, the more we forget it is already part of us. Stillness lives in the space between efforts. It is not summoned, it is recalled, not created, but uncovered, like the surface of a pond that reflects the sky the moment we stop stirring the water. You are not broken, you are becoming. In a village nestled between quiet hills and winding rivers, a young man arrived at the monastery gates, soaked in sorrow. He had lost everything, his livelihood, his marriage, his sense of identity. He knelt before the head monk and said, "I don't know who I am anymore. I feel useless, shattered. I came here because I am broken and I want to be fixed." The head monk studied him carefully, then led him without a word to the temple's garden. There, growing from the cracked stones of the courtyard, was a small, radiant lotus. Its petals were soft, pale pink, and open to the sky. The monk pointed to it and asked, "Do you think this flower is broken because it rose from mud?" The young man shook his head, confused. "No," he said, "it's beautiful." The monk smiled gently. "Then why do you see your suffering as a flaw instead of your soil?" That night, The man sat quietly in the meditation hall, those words blooming in his mind like the lotus itself. He had spent years trying to erase parts of his story, mistakes, regrets, collapses, as if they were stains. But in doing so, he had missed the truth. Those very moments were shaping him. Just as the lotus must grow through murky waters to rise above them, so too must the heart grow through difficulty to find light. The Buddha never promised a life without struggle. He promised that struggle could awaken us. In Buddhist practice, transformation is not about becoming someone new. It is about realizing what was always there beneath the rubble: clarity, strength, compassion. The pain, the failures, the moments of feeling lost, they do not break the soul. They carve it. They teach it to bend without snapping, to feel deeply without collapsing, to rise again, not in spite of what happened, but because of it. You are not broken. You are still becoming. You are unfolding. The cracks are not signs of failure. They are where the light enters. Every breath you take now in stillness is part of the great remembering, not of who you were, but of who you're growing into. And there is nothing wrong with the process. Let the silence teach what words cannot reach. In a remote monastery carved into the cliffs of a mountain, a young monk was known for his hunger for knowledge. He devoured every sutra, memorized long verses, and asked endless questions to every teacher who visited. He believed that if he just gathered enough words, enough teachings, enough answers, he would finally understand enlightenment. Yet the more he learned, the more restless he became. His thoughts raced even during meditation. He began to feel like he was collecting seashells, but missing the ocean. One day, the master of the monastery called him to the top of the mountain. They stood together at sunrise, watching the world slowly light up beneath them. The master said nothing. Minutes passed. The monk grew uncomfortable and finally asked, "Master, what teaching do you wish to give me today?" The master simply pointed to the sky. More silence. Confused, the monk pressed, "Please, help me understand. What do you want me to learn?" Still the master said nothing. Hours passed. The sun rose high. The wind moved through the grass. Birds glided overhead. The monk shifted from irritation to uncertainty, then from uncertainty to stillness. At some point, he stopped expecting an answer. He stopped needing one. He began to listen, not with ears, but with his whole being. In the quiet, something within him softened, not a concept, not a sentence, a feeling, a recognition, a peace beyond logic. When he turned to speak, he noticed the master had already walked away, but the lesson had been left behind. That evening, he did not reach for his books. He sat beneath a tree in the courtyard, breathed deeply, and let the silence hold him. For the first time, he was not asking. He was receiving. The Buddha once said that words are like fingers pointing to the moon. They are useful, but not the moon itself. Silence is where truth is felt, not explained. It reaches places no language can touch. It does not argue. It does not prove. It only reveals. In silence, the self dissolves, and something deeper awakens. Not knowledge, but knowing. Not answers, but presence. The silence becomes the teacher, and what it teaches cannot be forgotten, because it was never outside the heart to begin with. Peace is not earned, it is uncovered. In a monastery hidden deep within the misty pines of the eastern mountains, a devoted monk spent years chasing inner peace like a bird that kept flying just out of reach. He woke before dawn, fasted for days, recited chants until his voice trembled. He took on extra chores, denied himself comfort, and sat for hours in painful meditation. Still, his heart felt restless. When the bell rang for evening rest, he often stayed behind, whispering to the Buddha statue, "What else must I do to deserve peace?" One evening, an elderly nun visited the monastery. She moved slowly and smiled often, her steps soft as falling leaves. The young monk, still drenched in effort, approached her with burning sincerity. "I have done everything right," he said. "I've followed every rule, stayed disciplined, purified my thoughts. Why hasn't peace come to me?" The nun sat beside him and said nothing. She simply picked up a dusty stone from the path and began gently wiping it with her robe. Bit by bit, the stone revealed a smooth, shining surface beneath the dirt. She held it out and said, "Peace is not something you earn by effort. It is like this stone, always there, just hidden beneath what clings." The monk looked down at his hands, rough and worn from years of spiritual striving. He had tried to build peace, to deserve peace, to prove he was worthy of peace. But he had never tried to simply see it. That night, he did not push. He did not strive. He sat beneath the moon, watching his breath rise and fall, doing nothing. For the first time, he did not search for peace. He just allowed everything to be as it was, and in that allowing, something inside him softened. Beneath the effort, beneath the tension, beneath the story of not being enough, was stillness, pure, unshaken stillness. Buddhist wisdom does not treat peace as a prize or a finish line. It reminds us that peace is not a reward for perfection. It is the original ground beneath the layers of noise, fear, and becoming. It doesn't need to be created, it needs to be uncovered, through letting go, through presence, through gentle attention. The journey is not about climbing higher, it's about returning. Returning to what has always been quietly waiting beneath the doing. Peace uncovered. Healing does not require fixing, only feeling. In a village monastery surrounded by fields of wildflowers, a gentle boy arrived at the gates, orphaned and silent. His eyes carried the weight of things he couldn't name. The monks took him in, fed him, clothed him, and offered him the stillness of their way of life. But even as seasons changed, the boy never spoke. He helped with chores, followed the rituals, but his silence grew heavy, like a stone resting on the chest. The other monks worried. "We must fix him," they whispered. "He's too young to carry such sorrow." One day, the boy was given to the care of an old monk who rarely spoke himself. This elder did not try to teach. He did not ask the boy to explain. Instead, he simply sat beside him. Day after day, they swept the same garden path. They ate in silence. They watched the lotus flowers open in the pond at sunrise and close again at dusk. And slowly, something unspoken began to unfold. One rainy evening, the boy sat under the eaves, watching drops fall in perfect rhythm. He turned to the elder monk and asked quietly, "Why does the heart hurt, even when I don't think about it?" The elder replied, "Because thinking about pain is not the same as feeling it." He took the boy's hand and placed it on his own chest. Your heart doesn't want to be fixed. It wants to be felt, like rain, like wind, like silence. The boy began to cry, not loud, not dramatic, just soft tears that carried years of held breath. And the elder did not stop him. He didn't try to explain or solve or soothe. He just sat with him as the storm passed, quietly present, not fixing, just feeling. That night, the boy fell asleep without fear for the first time. In Buddhist teaching, pain is not the enemy. Our refusal to feel it is. Healing begins when we allow the hurt to exist without trying to reshape it. Fixing comes from the mind, cold and analytical, but feeling comes from the heart, warm, honest and raw. When sorrow is met with awareness instead of resistance, it transforms, it loses its sharpness, it softens. And slowly, what once felt unbearable becomes a source of understanding, of tenderness, of truth. Because nothing broken needs to be perfect to be whole. It only needs to be seen. You are already enough to rest. In a quiet monastery, surrounded by tall grass and cicada song, there lived a young monk who never stopped working. While others rested in the afternoon shade or walked slowly through the temple gardens, he scrubbed the stone floors until his hands bled. He memorized every sutra, fasted longer than required, and meditated until his knees ached. No matter how much he did, a voice inside whispered, "Not yet, not enough. Keep going." He feared that if he paused, he would fall behind, that if he stopped, his worth would disappear. One morning, while sweeping leaves that had already been swept the night before, the abbot approached and gently placed a hand on the broom. "Come," he said softly, "walk with me." They strolled beyond the monastery grounds to a still lake, where dragonflies hovered above the surface. The abbot pointed to the water and said, "What does the lake do to earn its reflection?" The monk said nothing. The abbot continued, "Does it chant, or clean, or fast? No, it simply is. And because it is still, the sky bows to it." The words pierced something deep. That night, the monk didn't sit in meditation out of duty. He lay on his mat, closed his eyes, and rested, not because he had finished all his tasks, but because he no longer believed rest had to be earned. The teachings of the Buddha remind us that our true value does not come from what we achieve. It comes from what we are, a conscious presence already whole beneath the effort. When we bind rest to productivity, we carry our exhaustion into every breath. But when we let go of the need to prove ourselves, rest becomes an act of self-compassion, not reward. You are not a project to be fixed. You are not a list to be completed. You are already enough, not because of what you've done, but because you are. Right now, in this breath. Even with your doubts, even with your fears, especially with your imperfections, the permission to rest is not something given by the world. It is something reclaimed from within. And tonight, without changing a thing, you are allowed to stop, to breathe, to be. Each breath softens what the mind made hard. There was once a monk who had been known for his strength, not just of body, but of will. Before entering the monastery, he had been a soldier, disciplined and unyielding. He brought that same intensity into his practice. He sat the longest in meditation. He fasted more than others. He never missed a chant, never broke a rule. But despite all his effort, his face was tight, his jaw clenched, his heart locked in armor no one could see. He followed the path with precision, but not with peace. One day, after a particularly long session of seated meditation, his teacher approached him and asked, "Why do you grip your breath like a weapon?" The monk was startled. "I don't," he replied quickly. "I focus to calm the mind." The teacher sat beside him and placed a small stone on the monk's palm. "Now, hold this tight," he said. "Tighter." The monk obeyed until his fist trembled. Then the teacher gently poured water over the clenched hand. It splashed, it scattered, it could not enter. "Now, open your hand," the teacher said. As the fist loosened, the water filled the curves of his palm. "This is what your breath wants to do," he whispered. "But your grip has turned it into a battle." That night, something shifted. The monk sat not as a soldier, but as a listener. He followed the breath, not with command, but with kindness. He let each inhale arrive like a guest. He let each exhale leave like a prayer. And in that softness, the tightness around his thoughts began to loosen. The guilt he had buried, the fear he had armored, the grief he had masked as strength. They rose gently, like fog lifting in the morning sun, and without force, they began to melt. The Buddha taught that the breath is not just air, it is the bridge back to ease, the tender companion of awareness. Where the mind builds tension, the breath undoes it, slowly, patiently, like water smoothing a stone. Thoughts can harden us, stories can trap us, but the breath remains simple, honest, always available. And each time we return to it without pressure, it softens what we've gripped too long, not by erasing the pain, but by offering it warmth. Suffering dissolves when it is no longer resisted. In a remote temple nestled between rolling hills and quiet wind, a novice monk began to dread his time on the meditation cushion. While others sat peacefully, he fought an invisible battle. Old memories would rise, a parent's harsh words, a friend's betrayal, the sting of being unseen. And with them came shame, anger, and sorrow. He tried to push the thoughts away. He tensed his jaw, controlled his breath, repeated mantras like armor. But the more he fought them, the stronger they returned. Meditation became war, and his heart grew heavier each day. One afternoon, after yet another difficult sitting, he approached the temple's elder. "Why does it get worse when I try to be still?" he asked, his voice trembling. "I came here to escape suffering, but now I feel it more than ever." The elder monk gently led him to a nearby stream, where leaves floated down from the trees above. "Try to stop the water from flowing," the elder said. The young monk looked confused. "I can't." "Exactly," the elder replied. "And yet, you are trying to do just that within your own mind." They sat in silence, watching the stream. The monk began to notice something. The leaves floated by without getting stuck. The water moved without struggle. It did not resist the fallen leaf or the bent twig. It allowed. That night, when the young monk returned to his cushion, he did not brace himself. He did not armor his mind. When the pain came, he welcomed it gently. "You may stay," he whispered inwardly. "I won't fight you anymore." And slowly, something shifted. The edges of his pain softened, his breath deepened, and for the first time, his suffering didn't tighten around him. It passed through him. Buddhism teaches that pain is inevitable, but suffering arises from resistance. Like holding a flame too tightly, we burn more from our grip than the fire itself. But when we stop pushing the discomfort away, it loses its fuel. What we allow softens. What we embrace transforms. Suffering doesn't always vanish instantly, but its grip loosens when we stop clenching. Peace arrives not by defeating pain, but by no longer running from it. What we turn toward with courage and compassion begins to dissolve in the light of acceptance. There is nothing to solve tonight, only to see. In a small wooden temple perched beside a slow-moving river, a young monk lay restless in his bed. The candle beside him had long burned out, but his mind kept flickering. He replayed conversations, imagined problems, tried to untangle the future before it arrived. Every time he closed his eyes, a new thought appeared. What if I fail? What if they don't understand me? What if I'm not enough? He shifted under his blanket, as if trying to rearrange his thoughts by rearranging his body. The next morning, his teacher found him in the meditation hall, eyes tired, spirit distant. "You look like someone who fought a war in his sleep," the teacher said gently. The monk looked down, ashamed. "I tried to solve everything before I could rest. I failed." The teacher picked up a smooth river stone from the garden. He held it up to the sunlight, revealing swirls of color hidden inside the gray. "Did this stone need to be solved before it showed its beauty?" he asked. "Or did we just need to look at it long enough?" That evening, the young monk returned to his room with no intention to fix anything. He sat in stillness, not to solve his mind, but to witness it. He watched thoughts rise and fall like ripples on a pond. He did not label them. He did not push them away. He did not reach for answers. He simply watched. And in the watching, the urgency began to dissolve. What once felt tangled became soft. What once demanded solutions now asked only to be seen. The Buddha taught that the mind is not a problem to be solved, but a landscape to be explored. In the daylight, we strive, we build, we repair. But at night, the spirit does not need more tasks. It needs mercy. Some thoughts are not puzzles. They are clouds. Some feelings are not blocks. They are waves waiting to pass. Peace doesn't always come from knowing. Often it comes from allowing, from trusting that this moment, as it is, holds enough truth. The night was never meant for fixing. It was meant for seeing, for letting the heart sit beside its own weather, without fear, without pressure, and letting the sky clear on its own. Do not chase peace. Sit still and let it arrive. At the edge of a forest monastery, where the wind moved gently through the cedar trees, there lived a monk known for his endless search. He traveled from temple to temple, teacher to teacher, always asking the same question: how can I find peace? He studied every scripture, recited countless mantras, fasted until he grew faint, and meditated until his legs went numb. And still, peace remained distant, like a bird that vanished the moment he reached out his hand. One evening, exhausted and disheartened, he came to an old temple high in the mountains, known not for its teachings, but for its silence. There, an aged nun welcomed him and simply said, "Rest, no more seeking." But the monk refused. "I must continue," he insisted. "There must be something else I haven't tried." The nun smiled and gestured to a still pond outside. The moon reflected perfectly on its surface. "Would you see the moon more clearly by stirring the water?" she asked. "Or by letting it be?" The monk stared, silent. Something inside him paused. He realized his entire life had been a kind of stirring. Every effort to chase peace had only made the water of his mind more turbulent. He had mistaken motion for progress, striving for wisdom. But the peace he longed for was never somewhere else. It was buried beneath the waves he created. That night, for the first time, he did nothing. He didn't chant. He didn't focus. He didn't seek. He simply sat. The thoughts came and went, like wind through the leaves. He allowed them. His breath moved in and out like the tide. He let it. And in the quiet space between striving and surrender, peace arrived, not loudly, but as a soft unfolding. Buddhist wisdom reminds us that peace is not something to be hunted or achieved. It does not respond to pressure. It waits patiently in the silence we rarely allow. It arrives when we stop fixing, stop reaching, stop grasping, and simply sit still long enough to notice what was always here. The deepest stillness cannot be chased. It comes when we stay, when we stop knocking on other doors and listen to the one already open inside. Forgive the past. It cannot hurt what is present. In a quiet corner of the temple garden, a middle-aged monk tended to a bonsai tree with more care than he gave anything else. Each morning he trimmed it gently, whispered to it, watered it drop by drop. It was his ritual, his refuge. But there was a heaviness in him that no one could miss, a silence that wasn't peaceful. He smiled, but his eyes never truly softened. He laughed, but only with his mouth. One evening, as the temple prepared for a full moon ceremony, a younger monk approached him and asked, "Why do you always sit alone when others are celebrating?" The older monk looked away. "I made mistakes," he said, "long before I came here. People I hurt, choices I wish I could erase. I don't deserve celebration." The younger monk listened without interrupting. Then he asked gently, "When you look at this tree, do you see the branch you once trimmed too short?" The elder was quiet. "No," the younger continued. "You see the whole of it, how it has grown, how it has healed." That night, the elder walked alone beneath the moon. He stopped by the koi pond, his reflection trembling in the water. For years he had chained himself to a past he could never return to. He wore his regret like a robe, heavy and familiar. But in that moment, something softened. The moonlight touched the surface of the water, and he whispered, not to the past, but to the present, "I forgive you." Not because the past deserved it, but because the present needed it. In Buddhist wisdom, forgiveness is not about rewriting the past. It's about releasing the grip it has on now. The past cannot reach into this moment unless it is invited. And each time we carry yesterday's shame, we lose today's breath. The lotus blooms not in yesterday's mud, but in the clear stillness of now. Forgiveness is not forgetting. It is not denying harm. It is the brave act of no longer letting an old wound bleed into a new day. To forgive the past is to protect the present. It is to say, this pain no longer gets to shape who I am becoming. Only now is real, and now is free. The noise in the mind is not your true voice. In a wind-swept temple built into the cliffs above the sea, a young monk struggled with the chaos inside his head. Each morning, he awoke already tangled in thoughts, criticisms, doubts, fears, memories. His mind jumped from the past to the future, from shame to anxiety, like a bird trapped in a small room. He feared he would never become truly peaceful, no matter how much he studied or how long he sat in meditation. One day, after a restless session in the hall, he went to the elder monk in frustration. "My mind never stops speaking," he said. "It says terrible things, that I'm not enough, that I'm wasting time, that I'll never find silence." The elder monk nodded slowly and led him to the cliff's edge, where waves crashed below and gulls cried overhead. "What do you hear?" he asked. "The sea, the wind, birds." "Good," the elder said. "But do you believe the sea is calling your name? That the wind judges you? That the gulls know your fears?" The monk laughed, unsure. "Of course not." "Then why do you believe every voice in your head belongs to you?" The words struck deep. That night, the young monk listened differently. When the thoughts came, "I'm failing, I'm behind, I'm lost," he didn't react. He noticed them as he would the distant crash of a wave. Sound, not truth. Movement, not meaning. The voices still came, but he stopped answering, and without his attention, they softened. In Buddhism, the mind is often compared to a monkey, restless, jumping, loud. But beneath the chatter, there is awareness, a presence that watches the thoughts, but is not made of them. The noise is not the self. It is weather, not sky, static, not signal. Your true voice does not shout. It whispers through stillness. It is the quiet knowing that needs no defense, the gentle presence that remains when judgment fades. When you stop identifying with the storm inside, you begin to hear the deeper calm beneath it. The mind will speak. That is its nature. But not everything it says is yours to believe. Let the noise pass like wind through trees. Let the silence inside you rise. That is the voice worth listening to. Healing begins when the story ends. In the hills where mist kissed the temple roofs each morning, a monk lived with a story he had told himself for years. Long before the monastery, he had been betrayed by someone he once loved. The pain was real, but what lingered long after the wound had closed was the narrative he repeated. "I was wronged. I was used. I was ruined." It became the background music to every quiet moment. Even as he chanted, even as he meditated, the story hummed in his mind like a low storm that never passed. He told it to other monks, not for pity, but because it gave him identity. The one who had survived, the one who had been hurt, the one who had every reason to carry sorrow like armor. But something strange happened. No matter how many times he told it, the ache never softened. In fact, it hardened, like a stone that grew heavier with each retelling. One afternoon, the temple received a visitor, an old nun who had walked hundreds of miles barefoot to reach them. She carried no belongings, only a smile that seemed to hold centuries. The monk, curious about her peace, asked, "How did you let go of your pain?" She looked at him with gentle eyes and asked, "What is its name?" He didn't understand. "What is the name of the pain without the story?" she said. "Not the betrayal, not the past, just the pain itself, as it lives now." The monk was silent. For the first time, he looked inward, not with a story in hand, but with stillness. What remained wasn't drama. It wasn't betrayal. It was a simple ache, raw, wordless, and not nearly as terrifying as he thought. It asked not for explanation, but for presence. That evening, he sat in meditation, not as a victim, not as a survivor, not as anyone with a name. He sat as breath, as body, as awareness. And without the story to carry, the pain had nothing left to hold on to. Slowly, it loosened its grip. The Buddha taught that suffering is born not only from pain, but from the mind's habit of wrapping pain in a narrative. The story becomes a cage, the retelling a chain. But when we stop explaining the wound, when we stop defending or defining it, the wound begins to breathe, and in that breath, healing takes root. The story is not your home. Let it end, and watch peace walk in. Compassion for yourself is the first step to stillness. In a quiet valley, where plum blossoms fell like pink snow in the spring, a young nun carried a secret weight. She had joined the monastery to escape her past, a past filled with mistakes, harsh words, and choices she could not take back. Though her robe was clean and her vows sincere, she could not silence the voice inside that said she was unworthy. Each time she sat to meditate, it returned. You are not good enough to find peace. And so she sat longer, fasted harder, spoke less, all in the hope that she might eventually deserve calm. An elderly monk noticed her growing thinner, more withdrawn, her eyes dim with silent struggle. One evening, he left a note outside her door. It read, "You would not treat a wounded bird the way you treat yourself." She opened the note again and again. The words softened something inside her. The next day, she joined the elder in the garden, where he was cradling a sick dove that had fallen from its nest. He fed it gently, humming a quiet tune. The young nun knelt beside him. "I don't know how to forgive myself," she whispered. The elder monk looked up, eyes kind. "Then begin by not attacking yourself." That night, she placed her hand on her chest as she meditated, and instead of forcing her thoughts to disappear, she whispered, "You're doing your best." She didn't demand silence. She didn't chase perfection. She offered herself the warmth she had been withholding for years, and something shifted. The mind began to slow, not because she conquered it, but because she stopped hurting it. The heart began to soften, not because it was fixed, but because it was finally seen. And in that softness, stillness appeared, not as a reward, but as a response. The Buddha taught metta, loving kindness, not just for others, but for oneself. Without it, meditation becomes punishment. Without it, silence becomes a prison. But when the self is held with tenderness, the noise loses urgency. The heart no longer needs to defend or explain. It simply rests. Stillness does not come from harshness. It comes when the war within ends. And that begins not with control, but with compassion. Let go of becoming and fall back into being. In a quiet valley, where the seasons turned like pages, there lived a monk who was always trying to become something more. He had been in the monastery for many years, and still he felt behind. He watched the senior monks walk with grace, speak with wisdom, and meditate with stillness. He compared himself to them, silently measuring his worth by how far he thought he had yet to go. Every step he took, every breath, every mantra, it all carried the weight of not yet. He wanted to be enlightened. He wanted to be better. He wanted to become. One morning, after struggling through another restless meditation, he went to the old stone Buddha that stood in the garden. He knelt and whispered, "Why am I never enough?" The stone said nothing, but the wind moved the branches above, and a single leaf drifted down, landing softly in his lap. The abbot had been watching from a distance. He walked over, knelt beside the monk, and said, "Do you see that leaf?" The monk nodded. "It is not trying to become a flower. It is not trying to become the branch. It has fallen, quietly, into its place. And in that place, it is perfect." The words settled into the monk like a warm cup of tea in cold hands. That night, he stopped trying. He sat in meditation, not as a student chasing some distant state, but as a human being, breathing. He let go of fixing himself. He stopped dressing up his breath in effort. He allowed the now to be enough. Buddhism teaches that the desire to become, even spiritually, is still desire. The chase to improve can carry the quiet poison of rejection. When we grasp for who we think we should be, we abandon who we are. But when we stop running, stop striving, and return to presence, we rediscover a truth more profound than any goal, that being is already whole. You are not incomplete just because you are not yet where you think you should be. You are not behind. You are here. In this moment, there is nothing more to prove, nothing to earn, nothing to fix. The ground of your being is not broken. It's just been covered by effort. Let go of becoming. Sit with yourself and feel the quiet miracle of being enough without needing to change. No thought can harm you unless believed. In a monastery shaded by ancient cypress trees, a young monk found himself tormented not by the outside world, but by the world inside his own head. Every day, as he swept the temple floors or served meals to others, his thoughts would whisper cruel things. You are a failure. You are not as wise as the others. You will never be free of this mind. These thoughts followed him into meditation, into sleep, into silence, and he believed every word. He tried everything to silence them, more chanting, longer fasts, stricter rules, but the more he fought the thoughts, the more power they seemed to have. He grew quiet, isolated, afraid to speak, afraid to live too loudly in case the thoughts were right. One day, he approached the abbot, ashamed. "I think I am broken," he said. "These thoughts, they feel like truth." The abbot took him to a nearby field where scarecrows stood to guard the rice. "Tell me," he asked, "do those scarecrows frighten you?" The monk blinked, unsure. "No, they look like people, but they're not." The abbot nodded. "That's how your thoughts are. They wear the shape of truth, but they are only straw." That night, the monk returned to the cushion with new eyes. When the voice said, "You're not enough," he heard it, but didn't follow it. When the thought shouted, "You'll never change," he didn't argue. He simply watched. Like clouds passing across a sky, the thoughts floated in, then out. And in their wake, there was stillness. Buddhism teaches that the mind generates thoughts constantly, like wind through trees. Some are kind, some are cruel, but none have power until we grasp them, feed them, believe them. The harm does not come from the thought itself. It comes from the story we attach to it, from the way we say, "This is me, this must be true." But when we observe instead of absorb, the spell breaks. A thought is just a thought, not a sentence, not a mirror, not a verdict. The mind may speak in many voices, but none of them define you unless invited in. You are not what you think. You are the one who watches. And in that watching, the fear fades, the noise quiets, and freedom begins. The body whispers when the soul wants to speak. In a small monastery surrounded by fields of golden rice, there was a young monk who began to feel ill. His appetite faded, his back ached. Sleep came only in broken pieces, and even during meditation, he could not find stillness. Concerned, the elders took him to a healer who found nothing physically wrong. "Your body is tired," she said, "but not from labor. Something inside you is trying to be heard." The monk returned in silence, confused. He was disciplined. He followed every rule. He smiled when others smiled, bowed when others bowed. But inside, there was a heaviness he never spoke of, a grief from his childhood, a dream he had abandoned, a quiet longing to feel free without needing to be perfect. He had buried those feelings beneath mantras and duties, hoping they would dissolve. But the body remembered. One evening, the abbot invited him to the riverbank, where fireflies flickered over the water like falling stars. "You are not sick," the abbot said gently. "You are silencing the part of you that's already wise." The monk began to cry, not from pain, but from recognition. For the first time, he placed his hand on his own chest and asked softly, "What have I not listened to?" And in that asking, something within him loosened. In Buddhist understanding, the body and mind are not separate. When the soul is unheard, the body begins to speak. Through tension, fatigue, illness, or discomfort, it whispers reminders, not to punish, but to awaken, to bring you home. The aching shoulders, the shallow breath, the tight chest, these are not failures. They are messengers. Beneath every physical weight is often an unloved truth, an emotion ignored, a longing unmet, a voice within waiting to be received, not fixed. When you stop running from the body's signals and start sitting with them gently, they unfold into understanding. When the body aches, ask what part of you is tired of hiding. When the breath shortens, ask what truth you're holding in. Listen, not with analysis, but with presence. The body never lies. It speaks when the soul is no longer willing to be silent. And when you finally listen with compassion, you do not just heal the body, you free the soul. Let go, let go, let go, and be held. In the highlands where mist clung to pine needles like breath on glass, a monk sat beside a small waterfall, his hands trembling. He had just lost someone he loved, a fellow monk, a friend, a quiet presence who once shared morning tea and silent walks beneath the moon, now gone, taken suddenly by illness, and the grief, like a vine, wrapped itself around his chest. He had tried to push it down, to recite sutras, to meditate it away, but the ache stayed, lodged like a stone behind his ribs. The abbot joined him one morning, wordless. They sat together, listening to the sound of water. Then the abbot picked up a fallen leaf, held it in his palm, and let the wind take it. "You are gripping pain," he finally said, "as if it's your job to carry it alone." The younger monk whispered, "If I let go, it will feel like I didn't care." The abbot shook his head gently. Letting go is not abandonment. It is trust. Trust that love remains, even when form does not. Trust that you are allowed to be held by something greater than sorrow. That night, the monk didn't force himself to be still. He didn't tell his tears to stop. He placed his hands on his lap, exhaled, and said quietly, "Let go, let go, let go." With each repetition, he loosened, not because he stopped loving, but because he stopped clenching. He let go of the need to understand, let go of the need to heal on a schedule, let go of the idea that pain must be punished or hidden. And something unseen responded, not in words, but in presence, like being held by the earth itself, like being cradled by silence. The Buddha taught that clinging is the root of suffering, even clinging to beauty, even clinging to love. But letting go does not mean losing. It means releasing the tension so that life can move again, so that the soul can breathe, so that healing can rise not from force, but from surrender. Let go of the story. Let go of the weight. Let go of the need to hold it all together, and be held, in this breath, in this moment, in the arms of what has never left. Sleep is not the escape. It is the return. In a forest temple where candles flickered low and the sound of distant crickets lulled the night, a monk once struggled with sleep. Each evening he lay awake under the open roof, watching shadows dance along the beams. He feared sleep, though he could not admit it. He called it laziness. He believed it was weakness. In truth, he feared what would arise when his mind stopped guarding itself. He used to pace before bedtime, reading sacred texts, reciting mantras quickly, trying to prove his worth one last time before surrendering to the night. And still, sleep came slowly, as if insulted by his resistance. One night, the temple's teacher entered the sleeping quarters quietly. She saw the young monk pacing, eyes hollow. She spoke gently. "Do you think the world disappears when you close your eyes?" He paused. "I don't know. It feels like I'm giving up." She smiled and knelt down, smoothing the blankets on his mat. Sleep is not the end of effort. It is the return to being. Not escape, but home. That night, he lay down differently, not in defeat, but in permission. He breathed not to control, but to soften. He let the weight of the day drop from his shoulders, not because it was solved, but because it didn't need to be. As his breath slowed, so did the noise. And sleep came, not like a thief, but like a familiar friend at the door. In Buddhist practice, we learn that striving can creep even into our rest. We see sleep as something to earn, a reward after enough doing. But true sleep, like true peace, is not a transaction. It is a return to breath, to presence, to the self that is untouched by the world's demands. Sleep does not mean leaving yourself. It means coming home to what was never lost. The mind quiets, not because it is empty, but because it no longer argues. The heart rests, not because all is perfect, but because all is allowed. Sleep is not the escape. It is the return to the soft truth that nothing more is needed. That being is enough. That stillness is safe. That home was always within. You are not the storm. You are the ocean. In a monastery built close to the sea, where the air always smelled of salt and wind, a young monk struggled with powerful emotions. Anger would rise like a fire in his chest, regret would flood his thoughts at night, and anxiety moved through him like waves in a storm. He feared his mind was too wild to be calmed. "There is too much chaos inside me," he confessed one day to the elder monk. "I try to stay still, but the storm comes back every time." The elder didn't answer right away. Instead, he led the monk to the cliffs, where they could see the ocean spread wide under the sky. That morning, the sea churned, waves crashing, white foam rising, the surface in constant motion. The young monk looked down and said, "That's exactly how I feel." The elder nodded, then pointed deeper. "Look beyond the waves. Beneath this surface, the ocean is still. The storms only touch the top. The depth remains quiet. And that deep stillness, that's what you really are." The monk stood silent as the wind brushed past. For the first time, he stopped seeing his emotions as flaws. He stopped seeing his thoughts as proof of failure. The storm wasn't him. It was what moved through him. Just as waves rise and fall without changing the depth of the sea, so too could feelings move without defining who he was. That night, during meditation, the monk did not resist the thoughts. When sadness appeared, he let it drift. When anger rose, he acknowledged it. But he did not cling. He remembered the ocean, and beneath the motion of the mind, he began to feel the stillness, vast, undisturbed, patient. In Buddhist wisdom, emotions are not enemies. They are weather, temporary, shifting, sometimes loud, sometimes soft, always passing. The self beneath them, the awareness watching them, remains untouched. The storm may scream, but it cannot uproot the deep waters. You are not your rage. You are not your fear. You are not even your sorrow. You are the ocean they visit. You are the depth they cannot shake. When you stop trying to calm the surface and instead rest in the stillness underneath, you remember the truth. The storm may come, but it does not stay, and it never defines the sea. Pain is a messenger, not a punishment. In a secluded monastery surrounded by tall pines and the gentle sound of bells in the wind, a young monk was injured while carrying stones to rebuild an old wall. A rock slipped, fell on his foot, and left him limping for weeks. But it wasn't the bruise that hurt him most. It was the shame. He believed he had failed in his duty, that he had been careless, that he had let his brothers down. Every step was not just pain in the body, but a flood of blame in the mind. You were foolish. You are weak. You deserve this. He avoided the meditation hall. He turned away when others tried to help. He clenched his jaw, pretending nothing was wrong. One morning, the head monk found him sitting alone beneath the Bodhi tree, his eyes tired from hiding his hurt. The elder sat beside him in silence for a long time, then said, "Do you know what happens when you ignore the temple bell?" The young monk shook his head. "It rings louder," the elder replied. "Pain is like that. It is not trying to punish you. It is trying to wake you." The monk stared at the ground, unsure. The elder continued, "Pain says, Something here needs your attention, not your judgment, your attention. Will you listen, or will you keep turning away? That night, the monk sat for meditation again, for the first time since the injury. This time, he did not resist the throb in his foot or the ache in his heart. He turned toward it with soft breath and curious awareness. And what he found was not punishment, it was a quiet truth. He had been carrying not just stones, but pressure, perfectionism, fear of being seen as weak. The pain hadn't come to punish him, it had come to speak. In Buddhist wisdom, pain is never the enemy. It is the bell, the teacher, the mirror. When listened to with compassion, it becomes a guide. When judged, it becomes heavier. We often believe suffering is deserved, that if we hurt, it must mean we've failed. But pain does not arrive to accuse, it arrives to inform, to show us where we are off balance, to call us home. Pain is a messenger, and when we stop punishing ourselves for receiving the message, healing begins. In letting go, you inherit peace. In the lowlands where lotus flowers grew in muddy stillness, a monk carried with him an old wooden box. No one knew what was inside, but he never left it behind. He kept it by his mat during meditation, held it tightly during prayer, and even placed it beside him while he slept. The other monks whispered, not out of cruelty, but out of concern. They noticed the box weighed on him, not just in his hands, but in his posture, his breath, his spirit. One day, during walking meditation, the head monk approached quietly and asked, "What lives inside that you cannot let go?" The younger monk looked down. "Memories," he said, "loss, failure, the life I had before. If I release it, I fear I'll have nothing." The elder nodded and gestured to a nearby tree where autumn winds had begun to strip away the leaves. The tree lets go of what it no longer needs, not because it gives up, but because it trusts the process. If it held on to every leaf, it would never know spring. That night, something shifted. The young monk sat with the box before him, no longer guarding it, but gazing at it. He realized he had carried the past not to honor it, but to remain bound by it, not out of love, but out of fear. Slowly, with trembling hands, he opened the box. Inside were letters, tokens, small pieces of the world he once clung to. He wept. Then, breath by breath, he placed the items on the temple altar, not as offerings of pain, but as a release of burden. And when the box was finally empty, so was the space it held in his chest. For the first time in years, he felt light. Buddhism teaches that suffering is not in the event, it is in the attachment, to control, to identity, to what should have been. But letting go is not weakness. It is the highest form of courage. It is the moment you stop carrying what no longer carries you. In letting go, you do not lose. You inherit. You inherit stillness, clarity, breath. You inherit a self no longer tied to stories or outcomes. You inherit peace, not as something you find, but as something that was waiting beneath your grip all along. Stillness doesn't mean nothing happens. It means nothing is forced. In a valley where mist hugged the trees and the river moved without urgency, a monk known for his ambition struggled with the idea of stillness. He believed stillness meant stagnation. That to be still was to fall behind. So he worked harder than anyone. He organized the gardens, recited more chants, volunteered for every task. His movements were efficient, his voice always composed, but beneath it all was a tension that never rested. When he sat to meditate, he judged the silence. "I'm not doing enough. I should feel more peace. I should be further along by now." He clenched his breath. He waited for stillness, like someone expecting a reward to fall into his lap. And when it didn't, frustration filled the gap. One day the teacher invited him to the edge of the monastery grounds where a bamboo grove swayed in the soft breeze. "Watch," the teacher said. "They are still, and yet they move." The monk looked confused. "But they are bending." "Yes," the teacher said. "They bend because they do not resist the wind. Stillness is not about freezing. It's about not forcing." Something in those words cracked through his armor. He realized he had been treating peace like a prize, forcing himself into silence, pushing his way toward tranquility. But true stillness, he began to see, was not something achieved. It was something allowed. That night, he sat differently. He didn't command the thoughts to stop. He didn't hold his breath hostage. He simply sat and listened to the breath, to the hum of crickets outside, to the quiet rhythm of being alive. And the more he allowed, the more stillness revealed itself, not as an empty room, but as a soft spaciousness that made room for everything. In Buddhism, stillness is not a pause in life. It's a deeper way of being with life. It doesn't demand silence. It invites it. It doesn't eliminate movement. It removes resistance. Stillness means letting things unfold in their own time, letting the breath rise and fall without control, letting the mind speak without chasing its words, letting life be what it is, without constantly shaping it. When nothing is forced, everything begins to flow. And that flow, that ease, is the stillness you've been looking for all along. The more you soften, the deeper you rest. In a monastery, hidden deep within a valley of wildflowers and quiet wind, a young monk prided himself on discipline. He kept the tightest posture during meditation, never let his back slouch, never let a single yawn escape during evening chants. He clenched his jaw when thoughts arose. He straightened his spine when his body asked for rest. He believed peace was something to be earned through control, through strength, through grit. But sleep never came easily. When the night bell rang and the others surrendered to dreams, he stayed awake. His body aching, his breath shallow, his thoughts loud. Stillness felt like something he had to fight for. One evening, an old monk noticed the tension in his shoulders during sitting meditation. After the session, the elder walked over and gently placed a warm stone into the younger monk's hand. "Hold this," he said, "as tightly as you can." The young monk obeyed. Minutes passed, and his hand began to cramp. "Now," the elder said, "open your palm." As the monk did, the stone rested more easily, same weight, but no more pain. "This," the elder whispered, "is the difference between discipline and force, between holding on and letting be. Peace doesn't bloom in clenched hands." That night, the young monk tried a different way. He lay on his mat, not as a soldier at war with his thoughts, but as a friend greeting the body. He softened his brow, released his jaw, let the breath rise and fall like a lullaby. He did not push sleep to come. He allowed it. And in that softness, something shifted, not just in his muscles, but in his being. A deep quiet began to take root, not because he mastered silence, but because he stopped resisting it. The Buddha taught that true rest arises not from perfection, but from ease. The soft mind is not weak, it is wise. The soft body is not lazy, it is ready to receive. The more we let go of the armor, the more we feel held by something larger than effort. Softness is not surrendering to chaos, it's trusting that we no longer need to fight. And when we soften, rest doesn't just visit, it stays. It wraps itself around the breath. It enters the bones. It carries us home. Do not fix the fear. Feel through it. In the shadow of the forest temple, as dusk softened the sky into shades of ash and amber, a monk sat trembling. He had always feared the dark, feared its silence, its unknowns, the way it made his thoughts louder. As a child, he had hidden from storms beneath blankets. As a novice, he had avoided the evening forest walks. Even now, years into monastic life, fear still crept in with the night. And each time it came, he tried to fix it. He repeated chants quickly, clung tightly to his beads, tightened his breath like a shield. Yet fear only grew stronger, returning night after night like a visitor who refused to leave. One evening, the elder monk handed him a lantern with no flame. "Tonight," he said, "walk to the forest and take no light but your breath." The younger monk froze. "But what if the fear returns?" The elder nodded gently. "It will. That is its nature. But your task is not to fix it. It is to feel it fully and keep walking." With hesitant steps, the monk entered the woods. At first, the trees loomed large. The rustle of leaves sounded like voices. His mind screamed warnings. But instead of fleeing, he let himself notice what fear felt like. How it pulsed in his chest, how it curled in his belly. He breathed into it, without fighting it, without solving it, just breathing, step after step. And something strange happened. The fear did not vanish, but it softened, like fog thinning under the sun. And in its place came a strange calm, not the absence of fear, but the absence of resistance. When he returned to the temple, the monk said only one thing: "It wasn't the dark that frightened me, it was my fight against it." In Buddhist wisdom, fear is not the enemy. It is a signal, a teacher. But when we rush to fix it, to patch it, to deny it, to outrun it, we miss the lesson it holds. Fear, when pushed away, grows louder. But fear, when gently felt, becomes something else. It becomes sensation. It becomes movement. It becomes energy that flows through the body like wind through branches, passing, not staying. Peace doesn't come from removing fear. It comes from not needing to remove it, from walking with it, breathing through it, and realizing it has no claws unless clung to. When fear is felt without armor, it cannot chain you. It can only move on. Healing is not linear. It spirals with grace. In a quiet monastery, tucked between the terraced rice fields and the whispering bamboo groves, a monk sat alone, frustrated. He had been practicing for many years, meditating daily, studying the sutras, offering kindness to every being he met. And yet one morning, an old wound returned. A sadness he thought he had left behind crept back in. He felt ashamed. "Why am I still here?" he thought. "Why am I feeling this again after all this time?" He avoided the meditation hall that evening and wandered into the temple garden. There, he found the head nun kneeling beside a spiraled stone path, smoothing its edges with a small brush. She looked up and noticed his heavy expression. "Do you think something is wrong because the pain returned?" she asked softly. "I thought I was done with it," he confessed. "But it came back today, as strong as ever. Maybe I've failed." The nun smiled, pointing to the stone path. "This spiral doesn't return to the same place. It only appears to. Each turn takes you deeper. Healing is like this. It repeats, yes, but only to show you what you're now ready to feel more fully." He stood in silence, letting the thought settle. Maybe he hadn't gone backwards. Maybe this pain wasn't proof of failure, but of deepening. The sadness hadn't returned to harm him. It had returned to be held with greater tenderness. That night, when the monk sat again, he did not brace against the sorrow. He breathed into it. He met it not with resistance, but with reverence. And though the ache was familiar, he noticed something different. His breath was steadier, his heart softer. He was no longer afraid of the spiral. He had started to trust it. In Buddhist wisdom, healing is not a straight road. It does not move forward like a staircase, where each step is higher than the last. It circles, revisits, unfolds in layers. Old wounds rise not because you are failing, but because you are growing strong enough to hold them with less fear, more compassion. Progress is quiet. It's found not in how fast the wound disappears, but in how gently you respond when it returns. You may feel like you're looping back, but you're meeting the same places with a wiser heart. That is grace. That is healing. And it is enough. Even the darkest thought cannot dim your original light. In a temple carved into the side of a mountain, where clouds would sometimes drift through the halls like ghosts, a monk sat in deep despair. He had begun his practice with joy, eager to find peace and clarity. But as the silence deepened, something unexpected happened. His mind turned against him. Thoughts rose that he had long buried, shameful memories, angry fantasies, fears so heavy they bent his breath. He began to believe these thoughts were who he really was. Maybe I'm not meant for peace, he thought. Maybe I'm too stained inside. For days, he withdrew. He spoke less, smiled less. His light dimmed not because of the thoughts themselves, but because he believed they defined him. The head monk noticed and invited him to the candle hall, where dozens of small flames flickered in the stillness. Without a word, the elder picked up a single candle and placed a black cloth around it. "What do you see?" he asked. "Darkness," the younger monk said. "Look again," the elder whispered. And as the monk leaned closer, he saw it. The light still glowed beneath the cloth. It had not gone out. It had not changed. It had simply been hidden. The elder turned to him gently. "Your thoughts are the cloth, but your nature is the flame." That night, the monk sat again. This time, when the darkness in his mind returned, he did not run. He did not try to erase it. He whispered inwardly, "You are not me. You are only passing." He sat with the shame. He sat with the fear. And as he allowed them to pass like clouds across the moon, he felt something steady beneath it all, an untouched light that watched, waited, remained. The Buddha taught that beneath the suffering, beneath the stories, beneath even the darkest corners of the mind, there is something unchangeable, pure awareness, original light. No thought, no matter how cruel, how frightening, how hopeless, can reach deep enough to stain it. You may forget your light. You may believe the thoughts that say it's gone, but it never leaves. It never flickers. Even in your lowest moment, even when your heart is heavy and your mind is loud, that light remains. And when you return to stillness, not to silence the thoughts, but to witness them, you'll find that your light never needed protection. It only needed remembering. Be here, now, where no problem lives. In a remote monastery perched above clouds and quiet winds, a young monk was haunted by the future. He constantly worried about what was ahead, his role in the temple, his family back home, the mistakes he hadn't yet made, but feared he would. His thoughts raced even in stillness. During meditation, he wasn't on the cushion. He was in an imagined tomorrow, solving problems that didn't yet exist. His mind lived in places his body had never been. One afternoon, while sweeping the stone path, he tripped over a small pebble and fell. Frustrated, he cursed under his breath, not at the stone, but at everything. The elder monk, who had been raking leaves nearby, looked up and said gently, "Your thoughts are scattered across 1,000 tomorrows. No wonder you missed what was under your feet." That evening, the elder invited the young monk to sit beside a candle and simply observe its flame. No mantra, no goal, just attention. At first, the monk's mind pulled away, back into planning, worrying, calculating. But slowly, with each breath, he returned to the flicker of light. He watched it move, listened to the sounds around him, felt the stillness of his hands resting on his lap. Something began to settle. And in that silence, he noticed something he'd never felt before, a strange kind of peace. Not loud, not overwhelming, just quiet, present, and utterly untouched by fear. In that moment, he realized the truth. The problems that overwhelmed him had never existed here. They only lived in the places he kept running to. But in this breath, in this exact moment, there was nothing wrong. The Buddha often taught that suffering comes not from what is, but from where the mind chooses to go. The present moment is rarely unbearable. It is the imagined future that exhausts us, the replayed past that chains us. But here, right here, there is only breath, sensation, silence. And that is where peace waits. To be here, now, is to step out of illusion, to drop the mind's noisy predictions and rest in what actually is. And in this now, no problem lives, only presence, only stillness, only the quiet truth that nothing more is needed to feel whole. Tonight, you are safe because you are present. In a small monastery where the walls breathed with age and the wind whispered through paper windows, a young monk lay awake night after night. His eyes stared into the dark, but his mind traveled everywhere else. It replayed old mistakes. It imagined what could go wrong tomorrow. It asked questions with no answers and feared shadows that never moved. Though the room was quiet, though the candle had long been extinguished, the noise inside him never stopped. He clutched his blanket tightly, not for warmth, but for control. One evening, the head monk entered his room with 2 cups of warm tea. They sat together on the floor without speaking. After a few minutes, the elder asked, "Where are you right now?" The young monk, confused, answered, "Here, in this room." The elder smiled gently. "Your body is, but your mind is in yesterday's regrets and tomorrow's worries. That's why you can't rest. You're trying to feel safe in places that don't exist." He handed the monk the tea. "Sip it slowly," he said. "Feel the warmth. Listen to the sound of the wind. Let this be the only moment." The monk followed his words. Just the tea, just the steam, just the breath. And for the first time in many nights, his chest softened. The fear didn't disappear, but it no longer owned the room. He wasn't running from the past or defending against the future. He was simply here. And in that presence, something opened. Stillness, safety, peace. Buddhist teaching reminds us that the only true refuge is the present moment. The past has already happened. The future hasn't yet arrived. But the present is where the breath is steady, where the floor holds you, where life is not a concept, but a feeling. Fear cannot survive long in presence because fear feeds on absence. It needs a mind in the future or a heart trapped in the past. But when you are here, fully here, the fear has nowhere to grow. Tonight, you don't have to solve anything. You don't have to rehearse tomorrow or undo yesterday. Just breathe. Just feel the bed beneath you. Just hear the silence as it wraps around your body like a warm hand. This is safety, not because the world is perfect, but because right now, in this moment, nothing is chasing you. Nothing is missing. You are not lost. You are not too late. You are here. And here is enough. Peace is not a state. It is your nature. In a small temple by the river where the mist hung low and birds sang like whispers, a young monk approached the abbot with confusion in his heart. "I've tasted peace before," he said, "during meditation or when walking through the forest at dawn, but it never lasts. It slips away. I must be doing something wrong." The abbot placed his hand on the monk's shoulder and led him to the riverbank. The surface of the water was calm, reflecting the sky like a perfect mirror. Then the abbot picked up a stone and tossed it in. Ripples spread, disturbing the reflection. "Where did the peace go?" the abbot asked. The monk frowned. "It disappeared." The abbot shook his head gently. "No, the peace didn't vanish. It's beneath the ripples, still there, always there." The young monk stared, realizing that the calm wasn't destroyed. It had only been stirred, and it would return, not through force, but through stillness. That night, during sitting meditation, the monk no longer chased silence. He no longer believed peace was something distant to be reached. He simply watched. Thoughts came. Emotions swelled. But beneath it all, there was something unmoving, something quiet, something alive that didn't come and go. He had not found peace. He had remembered it. Buddhist wisdom reminds us, peace is not a mood. It is not a reward. It is not an escape from pain. It is the ground beneath all things, the nature of awareness itself. When the mind is loud, it's easy to think peace is gone, but it's never gone. It is only hidden, like the sky behind passing clouds. You don't become peaceful. You return to what you already are. Even in moments of chaos, grief, or confusion, something inside remains unchanged. That still, clear space that does not flinch or flee, that watches the storm but is not moved by it. The practice is not about creating peace. It's about peeling away what covers it: fear, noise, resistance. The peace you seek is not elsewhere. It's the core of your being, the truth beneath the doing, the voice beneath the voices. You don't have to reach for it. You only have to stop reaching away. Watch the thought. Do not follow it. In a monastery high above the fog line, where clouds floated like slow-moving ships below the cliff's edge, a young monk struggled with his mind. Each time he sat to meditate, thoughts would rush in like a river after rain. What if I'm not progressing fast enough? What if I'm doing this wrong? What if I never find peace? The thoughts weren't just loud, they were magnetic. One led to another, and another, until he found himself lost in imagined conversations, regrets and fears, far away from the cushion beneath him. After a particularly restless session, the monk approached the temple's teacher and sighed. "My thoughts keep dragging me away. I can't stop following them." The teacher smiled and said, "Come, let's take a walk." They walked to the edge of the mountain trail, where the wind whistled through the trees. The teacher pointed to the path that led down into the valley. "Do you see that traveler?" he asked, as a figure appeared in the distance, slowly making their way along the trail. "Yes," said the monk. "Good. Now, do you feel the need to follow them?" The monk shook his head. "No, I can watch without walking after." The teacher nodded. "That is exactly how to treat your thoughts." That evening, when the monk sat on his mat, he changed his approach. When a thought arrived, "What if this is all a waste of time?" he simply noticed it. He didn't argue with it. He didn't analyze it. He let it pass, like the traveler on the mountain road. Some thoughts were loud, some were quiet, some seductive, some sharp. But none had the power to pull him away unless he got up and followed. Buddhist wisdom teaches that thoughts are like visitors at the door. They may knock, some even loudly, but they cannot come in unless you invite them. The mind will create stories. That's its nature. But awareness, the part of you that sees, is not the story. It is the space the story passes through. Peace does not come from having no thoughts. It comes from not being taken by them. When you watch without following, the thoughts begin to lose their grip. They no longer decide your state. They no longer choose your direction. You remain on the mountain, still, rooted, unmoved, while the thoughts walk by like clouds in the sky, fading without a trace. Rest is not earned, it is sacred. In a forest monastery where the pine trees creaked like old wooden doors and the morning fog lingered until midday, there lived a monk who never stopped moving. He rose before the bell, cleaned before the others woke, practiced longer, bowed lower, and always smiled, even when his body trembled with fatigue. To him, rest felt like failure, stillness like indulgence. He feared that if he paused, the world might think he hadn't done enough, or worse, that he hadn't become enough. One evening, as the sun dipped below the hills and the temple filled with candlelight, he stayed behind after the evening chanting, sweeping the floor for the third time. The head monk watched quietly from the corner and finally said, "Why do you sweep what is already clean?" The young monk froze. "I don't want to waste time. I want to be worthy of the peace others speak of." The elder approached slowly and handed him a folded cloth. "Then rest with purpose. That is also practice." That night, for the first time in many seasons, the monk did not meditate out of duty. He laid down his robe, removed his sandals, and sat by the open window. He let the breeze touch his skin. He watched the moon move across the sky like a silent teacher. He let his shoulders drop, not from weakness, but from trust. And there, without effort, he felt something new, an unfamiliar stillness that welcomed him without conditions. Buddhism teaches that rest is not a reward given at the end of perfection. It is a sacred return to wholeness. In a world that constantly demands doing, achieving, proving, rest becomes a rebellion rooted in wisdom. The body is not a machine. The spirit is not a ladder. There is no final version of yourself that finally deserves peace. The breath itself rests between each inhale and exhale. Nature sleeps. The trees pause. The river slows. Why should you be the exception? Rest is not what you get after you've earned it. Rest is what you're always allowed to receive, not because you've done enough, but because you are enough. To rest is to remember your place in the rhythm of life, not as a worker, not as a role, but as a being, whole, present, sacred. The breath knows the way back to center. In a temple carved from stone at the edge of a quiet desert, a monk found himself unraveling, not from pain, not from loss, but from something less visible, disconnection. His thoughts were scattered, his days felt hollow, and his prayers rang empty in the silence. Though he still moved through the rituals, lighting incense, bowing before the altar, reciting verses, something inside him felt lost, as though he had drifted far from some place he could no longer name. One evening, as the wind howled through the temple walls like a memory too large to hold, he went to the head monk and asked, "What do I do when I don't know who I am anymore?" The elder monk didn't speak. He simply placed his hand over his own heart and breathed in, slowly, deeply, and then exhaled as if letting go of centuries. He nodded for the younger monk to do the same. Reluctantly, the monk closed his eyes. He placed his hand on his chest, and he breathed. It wasn't dramatic. It didn't erase the doubt or instantly solve his unease, but something shifted, subtle and profound. His awareness moved from the noise in his head to the rhythm in his body, from the stories to the sensation, from drifting to arriving. He breathed again, and with each breath he felt less like he was reaching, and more like he was returning. The Buddha taught that the breath is not just air, it is anchor, it is refuge, it is a sacred tether to the present, the body, the now. No matter how far the mind wanders, no matter how lost the heart feels, the breath remains, constant, quiet, waiting to guide us home. You don't need to think your way back to peace. You don't need to fix yourself to feel whole again. You only need to breathe, not as an escape, but as a remembering. Each inhale is a return, each exhale a release, and between them you find the place that was never gone, your center. The breath knows. It carries you without judgment. It welcomes you without condition. When everything else feels uncertain, let the breath lead. It will take you not somewhere new, but back to where you've always belonged. There is no tomorrow in this breath, only presence. In a hillside temple where cherry blossoms fell like soft snow and time seemed to slow with the wind, a young monk was always looking ahead. Every morning, As he washed his face or swept the temple floor, his thoughts raced into the future. What will I become? Will I be wise? Will I ever be enough? His days were filled not with what was, but with what might be. He walked quickly, sat tensely, and even during meditation, his mind climbed ladders that led to distant, imagined tomorrows. One afternoon, the head monk handed him a bowl of tea and said nothing. They sat beneath a blooming tree, petals floating into the cup. The young monk stared at the tea, distracted by thoughts of what he should be doing, what he should be improving, how to catch up with where he thought he was supposed to be. The elder noticed and spoke softly. "Drink the tea." The monk blinked. "Now?" "There is no tea in tomorrow," the elder replied. "Only in this moment." The monk took a slow sip. The warmth spread through his chest. The fragrance settled into his breath. And something happened. His mind paused. For a moment, there was no future, no becoming, just the weight of the bowl in his hands, the taste on his tongue, the quiet of the blossoms falling around him. That evening, he returned to the meditation hall not to achieve calm, but to experience it. With each inhale, he reminded himself, this breath does not contain yesterday. With each exhale, this breath does not reach for tomorrow. He sat inside the only thing that was real, now. The Buddha taught that the present moment is not a stepping stone, it is the destination. The breath does not carry plans. It does not ask who you will be. It asks only that you be here. Tomorrow is a story the mind tells to fill silence. But in this breath, there is no time, no chasing, no lack, just sensation, stillness, presence. And within that presence is peace. Not because everything is resolved, but because everything unnecessary has fallen away. There is no tomorrow in this breath, no pressure, no proving, just now, just you, and it is enough. True rest begins where striving ends. In a quiet mountain monastery where the days were marked by the ringing of a bronze bell and the soft sweep of robes across stone floors, a monk known for his fierce discipline slowly began to burn out. He had once been admired for his devotion, always the first to rise, the last to sleep, never missing a chant or a task. He fasted often, meditated for hours, memorized long sutras with perfect precision, but inside he was tired, not just in the body, but in the soul, a kind of exhaustion no amount of sleep could touch. One evening, after collapsing onto his mat with aching limbs and a racing mind, he turned to the elder monk beside him and whispered, "Why do I feel so far from peace, when I've tried so hard to reach it?" The elder monk said nothing at first. Then, after a long pause, he asked, "When a bird flies across the sky, is the sky improved by its effort?" The monk frowned. "No. The sky is simply there." "Exactly," the elder said. "You don't need to earn the sky. You just need to stop flapping and let yourself be held by it." That night, something inside the monk softened. He didn't wake up before dawn. He didn't fast. He didn't chant with perfect form. He simply sat beneath a tree and breathed. Not to become enlightened, not to achieve calm, just to be. He let go of trying to arrive, and in that letting go, he arrived. The Buddha never taught that rest was a reward. He taught that rest is our natural state, what arises when we stop running from the moment and stop chasing something more. Striving is like tightening a fist around stillness, hoping to possess it. But stillness cannot be held. It appears when the grip loosens. True rest does not come when everything is done. It comes when you realize nothing needs to be done for you to deserve peace. You don't need to be more disciplined, more perfect, more quiet, or more spiritual. You only need to stop grasping. And in that pause, where the breath is slow, the effort drops away, and the self is no longer a project. You feel it. Not as something you achieved, but as something that was waiting. True rest, already here, the moment striving ends. What if nothing is missing right now, in a quiet monastery surrounded by golden fields that swayed with the wind like breathing earth? A monk lived with a constant ache, a silent hunger for something unnamed. He had given up possessions, status, and comfort, yet still felt a strange emptiness that followed him like a shadow. He told himself that perhaps peace would come when he became more enlightened, more disciplined, more deserving. Every sunrise was met with the same inner whisper. Not yet. Not enough. Something's still missing. One day, while working in the garden, he knelt beside an older monk who was planting vegetables in the soil with bare, calloused hands. They worked in silence for a while, until the young monk said, "I can't shake this feeling that something's just not there. Like I'm always reaching for a part of myself that I haven't found yet." The older monk didn't answer right away. Instead, he pointed to a cabbage growing nearby, its green leaves open to the sky. "Do you think that plant wakes each day wondering what it's missing?" The young monk looked at the cabbage, still wet with dew. It was not perfect. Some leaves were torn, others were curled from too much sun, and yet it stood whole, rooted, alive. That night, the monk sat in meditation, but he didn't try to fix anything. He didn't try to improve or seek. He asked only one question. What if nothing is missing right now? Not his past, not his progress, not his worth. Just this breath, this moment, this body exactly as it is. And something shifted. He noticed the rhythm of his heart, the softness of his robe, the sound of crickets beyond the walls. The world didn't change, but the grasping in his chest loosened. For the first time, he wasn't searching for peace. He was in it. The Buddha taught that longing is often the illusion, not the lack. The sense that something is missing is not proof that it is. It is the mind clinging to what isn't here, while the heart quietly waits in what is. Maybe you are not behind. Maybe you are not broken. Maybe there is nothing left to chase in this moment. The breath is full, the ground is steady, and maybe, just maybe, nothing is missing right now at all. The soft heart is the strongest one. In a monastery surrounded by tall cedar trees and silence so pure it could carry the sound of a single breath, there was a young monk known for his emotional sensitivity. He wept easily. He felt the sorrow of others deeply. When he heard a bird cry or saw an elder monk's trembling hands, something inside him cracked open. He often worried this made him weak. While others appeared stoic and unmoved, he felt everything. And in secret, he believed something was wrong with him. One afternoon, after witnessing a funeral procession pass through the village below, The monk sat by the temple gates with tears in his eyes. The head monk saw him there and joined him quietly. "You feel too much," the young monk said. "I can't toughen myself the way the others have. It makes me ashamed." The elder didn't answer right away. Instead, he took a small leaf and held it in his hand. "This leaf bends in the wind," he said, "but it never breaks. That is why it survives the storm." The monk looked up, confused. "The hardest stone," the elder continued, "cracks under pressure, but the soft leaf, it flows, it yields, it lives." That night, the monk sat in meditation, not trying to shield his emotions or silence them. He let them move through him like wind through an open window. Grief, compassion, joy, all were welcome. And in doing so, he realized something. His heart didn't need to become harder. It needed to be trusted, because it wasn't weakness that made him feel, it was depth. In Buddhist teaching, strength is not defined by how much we can suppress, but by how deeply we can remain open in the presence of suffering. A soft heart isn't fragile. It's resilient. It allows itself to break and heal over and over without closing. It sees the pain in others and reaches out, not away. And that reaching, that gentleness, is a kind of courage few dare to live by. The world often teaches that strength is about armor. But Buddhism reminds us the most powerful protection is tenderness, the heart that can remain soft in a world that can be sharp. That is the heart that changes everything, not by force, but by presence, by compassion, by being unbreakably open. Let the world spin without your hands on it. In a sun-warmed monastery, perched on a quiet ridge above the rice fields, there lived a monk who could not stop trying to fix everything. He was kind, devoted, and always the first to help. If someone fell ill, he rushed to their side. If the temple grounds were untidy, he cleaned before being asked. But more than his hands, it was his mind that could not rest. He worried about the future of the monastery, about the weather, about the troubles of faraway lands he'd never seen. His thoughts clung to every problem like vines climbing a wall, twisting, tangling, tightening. One morning, after a sleepless night filled with restless thoughts, he sat by the garden, his face drawn and tired. The head monk approached and handed him a small wooden spinning top. "Make it spin," the elder said simply. The younger monk twisted the top and let it go. It spun beautifully, quietly, on the stone path. "Now," the elder continued, "keep it spinning with your hands." The monk reached forward to touch it, but the moment his fingers interfered, the top wobbled and fell. The elder smiled. "Some things keep their balance best when we let them be." That night, the monk meditated without the need to solve the world. When thoughts came, of wars he could not stop, of people he could not save, of futures he could not predict, he bowed to them gently, then let them pass. He realized his compassion was noble, but his grasping came from fear. Fear that if he let go, the world would fall apart. But it didn't. It spun, just as it always had. The Buddha taught that not all suffering comes from what happens, but from the need to control what doesn't belong to us. The world moves on its own. Seasons change without permission. Rain falls without approval. Life continues with or without our intervention. To let go is not apathy, It is trust. Trust that life has its rhythm, that not every burden is yours to carry, that peace can bloom not just in action, but in surrender. Let the world spin. Let the tides rise. Let the leaves fall. You were never meant to hold everything. You were meant to breathe, to witness, to be. And in that release, you'll find a deeper strength than control ever offered. Release the thinker. Return to the witness. In a mountaintop monastery, so high that clouds sometimes drifted through the windows, a monk sat each day battling his own thoughts. His mind was relentless. Even as he sat cross-legged in silence, it churned with questions, doubts, analyses. What am I doing wrong? Am I meditating correctly? What does this moment mean? Every breath became a calculation, every stillness a problem to solve. He believed he needed to think his way into peace. One afternoon, while walking along a narrow path lined with prayer flags fluttering in the wind, he came across the abbot, watching the sky. No words, just silence. The monk stood beside him, unsure how to quiet his mind. "I can't stop thinking," he finally said. "It feels like my thoughts are controlling me." The abbot didn't turn. He simply asked, "Who is aware that you are thinking?" The monk blinked. "Me, I suppose." The abbot finally turned and smiled. "Then you are not the thinker. You are the one who watches." Those words stayed with the monk like an echo inside a deep cave. That night, as he sat in meditation, the thoughts came as usual, memories, distractions, judgments, but he didn't engage with them. He didn't argue or agree, he just noticed. Each thought floated by like a leaf on a stream, and he remained on the bank, watching, present, still. And something began to shift. The noise of the mind didn't disappear, but its hold loosened. He no longer felt trapped by the content of the thoughts, because he remembered he was not the one doing the thinking. He was the witness, silent, steady, untouched. In Buddhism, the mind is a powerful tool, but it is not the self. The thoughts that arise are like clouds, temporary, drifting, endlessly changing. But the sky behind them, the witness, that is what's real. That is what's constant. Peace is not found in controlling every thought. It's found in remembering that you are not the chaos inside your head. You are the awareness that sees it all. When the thinker is released, when there's no need to fix or chase or judge the mind's movement, the witness returns. And in that return, the noise fades, the breath deepens, and the truth becomes clear. Stillness was always there. It only waited for you to remember. The wound does not close by force, but by warmth. In a monastery where the air smelled of sandalwood and silence, a young monk sat each evening with his hand pressed to his heart. Years before, he had been betrayed by someone he trusted, before his days in robes, before his head was shaved, before he sought peace within stone walls. Though time had passed, the pain had not. It lived in his chest like a secret flame, hidden behind polite smiles and perfect posture. Every time he sat in meditation, it returned, and each time he tried to push it away. By clenching his jaw, straightening his back, reciting mantras faster and louder, hoping discipline would be strong enough to shut the pain out. But it never worked. The wound stayed, silent, unmoving, unhealed. One night, the elder monk noticed the tension etched into his young disciple's face. Without saying a word, He placed a warm cup of tea in the boy's hands. Not too hot, not too full. The warmth of it soaked through his palms, into his bones, and something inside him softened. The elder spoke softly. "A wound cannot close by being beaten into silence. It closes when it is held gently, like this tea, without fear, without hurry." That evening the young monk sat with the pain, but this time he did not try to conquer it. He breathed into it. He placed his hand over it, not to banish it, but to acknowledge it, to say, "I see you. I won't run." And for the first time the pain moved, not away, but through him, as if it had only been waiting for a little kindness to let go. Buddhist wisdom reminds us, healing does not arrive through force. The heart does not open through discipline alone. Some wounds are not meant to be conquered, but cradled. It is not power that makes them fade, but presence. Not resistance, but warmth. The mind may want to rush healing. The ego may demand victory over pain. But the heart knows another way. It asks only for tenderness, for breath, for compassion. And when you finally meet your own hurt like a friend instead of a foe, something begins to change. Not because you've overpowered the wound, but because you've stopped abandoning it. The wound doesn't need to be chased away. It needs to be welcomed home. You are already whole beneath the noise. In a monastery shaded by ancient fig trees, where the wind moved through hanging bells like gentle breath, a young monk struggled with a feeling he couldn't name. He practiced every ritual, bowed at every shrine, repeated every chant, but still felt like something was missing. Deep inside, there was a hum of restlessness, a quiet belief that he was not complete, that something within him was broken, unfinished, not yet enough. He often compared himself to others. Older monks seemed calmer. Their eyes looked more peaceful, their movements more certain, and he thought, maybe when I finally become like them, I'll feel whole too. One morning, after another restless night of chasing thoughts in meditation, the young monk found the head teacher tending to the garden. The elder was gently brushing dust from the surface of a weathered stone statue, one that had become almost invisible under layers of dirt, moss, and fallen petals. "Why are you cleaning that old statue?" the monk asked. The teacher smiled. "Because the Buddha is underneath." The young monk tilted his head. "But it looks broken." The teacher shook his head. "Not broken, just hidden." That night, those words echoed in the young monk's mind. Not broken, just hidden. And for the first time as he sat on his mat, he didn't try to become peaceful. He didn't force his thoughts away or tell himself to improve. He simply sat and allowed everything to be as it was. The anxiety, the doubt, the noise. And beneath it all, he began to feel something he hadn't noticed before. A quiet presence, a steadiness, not loud or proud, just there, like the statue beneath the dust, like the Buddha beneath the thoughts. Whole, waiting. Buddhist wisdom teaches that wholeness is not something you earn. It is not the prize at the end of fixing yourself. It is what you were born with. The noise of the mind, the pressure to become, the belief that you are lacking, these are veils. They may seem real, but they do not touch your true nature. You do not have to reach wholeness. You have to remember it. Underneath every thought, every fear, every identity the world has placed on you, there is something that has never been lost. It watches, it breathes, it knows, and it is already whole. Silence, speaks louder than fear. In a mountain monastery where the fog moved like breath across the earth, a young monk lived with a storm inside him. He had grown up in a place filled with shouting, doors slammed, words thrown like stones, and footsteps that echoed with anger. Even though he now lived in peace, the fear had followed him. It lived in his chest, in his breath, in the way his shoulders never quite relaxed. He feared conflict, disapproval, being misunderstood. So he spoke often, explaining, apologizing, defending, thinking if he said the right things, he could outrun the fear. But fear doesn't listen to logic. It listens to tone, to silence, to presence. One afternoon, during a walk through the pine grove behind the temple, the head monk asked him, "When a deer hears danger, does it argue with the forest?" The young monk blinked. "No, it becomes still." The elder nodded, "Because the forest speaks louder in silence than it does in sound, and so do you." That night, the young monk sat in meditation. The usual fears came. What if I fail? What if they think less of me? What if I'm not good enough? But instead of answering the thoughts, he went silent. He didn't argue. He didn't try to make the fear go away. He just let it speak and listened without flinching. And slowly, something strange happened. The fear began to lose its voice, like a wind that had nothing to blow against, like a wave that met the stillness of deep water. The fear was loud, but it wasn't strong, not anymore. The Buddha taught that fear is fed by reaction, by the constant grasping, explaining, and escaping. But silence starves it. Silence says, "I am not afraid of you. I do not need to shrink or defend." It becomes a shield, not by closing off, but by opening without resistance. When you stop responding to fear with noise, you begin to hear something deeper. A strength that does not shout. A calm that cannot be shaken. In silence, fear cannot find anything to grip. And in that stillness, you begin to remember who you are beneath the trembling. You do not need louder words to quiet fear. You need stillness. You need breath. You need the kind of silence that is not empty, but full of knowing. Because that silence speaks louder than fear ever could. There is nothing to protect. There is only to accept. In a monastery, hidden deep within a valley of shifting mists, a monk lived as if the world were made of knives. Every word spoken to him felt like a test, every glance a judgment. He kept his thoughts guarded, his emotions locked tight, and his heart wrapped in silence. He feared vulnerability. He believed if he let others see him fully, they would find something lacking. So he wore calmness like armor. Stillness became his shield, but inside he was exhausted. He meditated not to open, but to defend. Each time a memory of shame or sadness surfaced, he buried it. Each time affection reached for him, he turned away. He thought peace meant never being touched. One day, while working in the rain, he slipped in the mud and scraped his hand. As he winced and tried to hide it, the head monk walked by and saw the wound. "Let me clean it," the elder offered gently. The young monk hesitated. "It's nothing," he said, trying to cover it with his robe. The elder smiled. "Even the body asks for care. Why should the heart be any different?" Later that evening, the young monk sat on his cushion and let that question echo. He began to see that everything he'd been protecting was a fear of being seen, a fear of being wrong, a fear of not being enough. But what if there was nothing wrong? What if there was nothing broken to guard, only stories that no longer served? So he tried something new. When a painful thought came, he didn't push it down. When his heart ached, he didn't build walls around it. He breathed, he watched, he accepted. Not because it felt easy, but because it finally felt true. Buddhist wisdom reminds us that the self we protect is often the one that doesn't need protecting. It's the imagined self, the one made of roles and fears and old wounds. But the real self, the one behind the defenses, needs no armor. It only asks for presence. There is nothing to guard when nothing is at war. The pain doesn't need to be hidden. It needs to be held. Acceptance is not resignation, it's freedom. The moment you stop trying to be untouchable, you become unshakable. Not because you're hard, but because you're open. Let the inhale carry you home. Let the exhale let it go. In a small monastery beside a slow-moving river, a young monk struggled with restlessness. His thoughts would not stop. He longed for peace, but felt disconnected from it, as if serenity belonged to someone else, somewhere else. When he sat to meditate, his breath was shallow, tight, almost reluctant. Each inhale felt like a question, each exhale like an unfinished sentence. He didn't know how to be here, not fully, not gently. One evening, the elder monk watched as the young disciple fidgeted during meditation. He approached and placed a hand on his shoulder. "Stop trying to breathe," he said, "and start letting the breath find you." The words were strange, but something about them stuck. That night, the young monk sat alone beneath the stars. Instead of forcing silence, he focused only on the breath. The inhale arrived like a wave, soft, unhurried, generous. It filled his chest, and for the first time, he didn't fight it. He let it carry him, into the body, into the moment, into stillness. Then the exhale came, long, emptying, releasing. He followed it as it left him, taking with it the tension, the grasping, the ache of needing something more than this. Inhale, arrival. Exhale, release. Again and again, and suddenly it wasn't just breathing, it was belonging. The Buddha taught that the breath is the most faithful teacher. It does not ask anything of you, it only invites you to come home. Each inhale is a return, not to a place, but to presence. Each exhale is an offering, not of control, but of surrender. You don't need to master the breath. You only need to notice it, to trust that it knows the way back when the mind has wandered too far. Inhale, and you remember you are here. Exhale, and you remember you don't need to hold anything else. There is no effort in this, no goal, just rhythm, just being. Let the inhale carry you back to your body. Let it fill you with what already belongs, and let the exhale take with it everything you were never meant to carry. That is where rest lives, not in what you think or fix or force, but in the quiet space between breath and being. Do not resist rest. It is sacred surrender. In a monastery where the wind spoke through prayer flags and the evenings smelled of jasmine and warm stone, a monk struggled not with work, but with stillness. He could chant for hours, sweep every corridor spotless, teach the younger novices with calm precision. But when the day ended and the temple grew quiet, something inside him tightened. He would lie down, yet sleep would not come. His body was tired, but his mind would not loosen its grip. Rest to him felt like weakness, like giving up, as if the world might fall apart if he stopped holding it up. The head monk noticed the wear in his eyes, the heaviness he tried to hide beneath neat robes and straight posture. One evening, as the sun sank behind the hills, the elder monk walked with him in the garden. They passed a tree whose branches bowed gently under their own weight, leaves shimmering in the golden light. "Why does that tree bend?" the elder asked. The young monk shrugged. "Because it's tired?" The elder smiled. "No, because it trusts the earth will catch it." That night the monk returned to his mat, but he didn't fight the silence. He didn't brace for insomnia. He placed his hands on his chest, felt his own breath moving in and out like a tide, and whispered softly to himself, "It's okay to stop." He let the weight he'd been carrying melt into the floor beneath him, not because it had vanished, but because he no longer believed he had to carry it alone. Buddhism teaches that rest is not just a break from effort, it is a sacred surrender, a return to being rather than becoming. In a world that constantly demands more, rest becomes an act of defiance and of deep wisdom. To rest is not to fail. It is to remember that your worth was never tied to motion. You don't have to fix every thought before you rest. You don't have to solve yourself like a puzzle. You are not a project to complete tonight. You are a being allowed to soften, allowed to be held by stillness. Rest is not what you do when there's nothing left. It's what makes you whole again. It is not the end of practice. It is the practice, sacred, tender, and true. Sleep comes faster when the past is not packed with you. In a monastery nestled in the hills where cicadas sang at dusk and the night air cooled the stones underfoot, a monk tossed and turned on his mat each night. By day, he was calm, disciplined, focused, steady. But when the silence of evening settled in and the lanterns dimmed, his mind lit up with memories. Old words spoken in anger, mistakes made before he donned the robe, moments when he had been misunderstood, rejected, or deeply ashamed. He carried the past like a bag slung over his shoulder, so tightly tied, it came with him even into sleep. One evening, the elder monk noticed his tired eyes and heavy breath. After the final bell, he asked the young monk to bring his travel sack and meet him in the courtyard. The elder filled the bag with stones, one by one, as he whispered, "This one is the harsh thing you said. This one is the regret you keep replaying. This one is the apology you never received. Now, walk around the temple 3 times." The young monk obeyed. By the second lap, his shoulders ached. By the third, his knees shook. When he finally dropped the bag at the elder's feet, the monk looked up, breathless. "Why do I carry this every night?" he asked. The elder smiled softly. "That is the question." That night, the monk lay on his mat and pictured himself gently setting down each memory, one stone at a time, not throwing them away, not hating them, but simply saying, "You do not need to come with me tonight." He breathed into the space they left behind, lighter, warmer. Sleep arrived not as an escape, but as a return. The Buddha taught that clinging is the cause of suffering, not the past itself, but the grasp we keep on it. The past cannot be changed, but it also cannot follow you unless you invite it. Like luggage packed for a journey that ended long ago, it only weighs you down when you forget you can leave it behind. Sleep is not about escaping life. It's about entering the part of life that begins when resistance ends. When the past is no longer dragged into the present, rest becomes natural. You don't have to earn it. You only have to release the load. Let the day end. Let the thoughts soften. Let the past stay where it belongs. And sleep will come. Even the tightest thought unwinds in loving awareness. In a small meditation hall nestled beneath a canopy of flowering trees, a monk sat with a mind wrapped in knots. No matter how still he tried to be, one thought kept returning, sharp, heavy, unforgiving. It was a memory, a mistake, a single moment from his past he could not forget, and worse, could not forgive. Each time it surfaced, it came with shame, like fire, and a voice that whispered, "You should have known better." He tried to push it down. He tried to out-breathe it, out-sit it, out-pray it, but it clung tighter. One evening, after another failed attempt to meditate it away, he approached the temple's oldest nun, someone whose presence felt like sitting beside still water. "I've tried everything," he said, "but this thought won't let go of me." The nun looked at him with quiet compassion and said, "Then stop trying to let it go. Let it be, and love it while it's here." He frowned. "Love a thought that hurts me?" She nodded. "Not because it is right, but because it is already yours, and what is held with love cannot stay in pain." That night, the monk returned to his cushion and stopped fighting. When the thought came, he didn't resist. He didn't argue. He welcomed it like an old friend who'd been misunderstood. He said to it, silently, "I see you. I know you're hurting. It's okay." And for the first time, it softened. Not vanished, not erased, but it no longer bit at his heart. It unwound, breath by breath, like a fist that finally realized it didn't need to stay clenched. In Buddhism, thoughts are not enemies. They are guests. And even the darkest, most painful ones lose their sting when they are held in loving awareness. Awareness that does not judge, does not flinch, does not try to fix, but simply sees. Compassion is not something we apply after the storm has passed. It is the light we shine while the storm still rages. The tightest thoughts, the ones that coil like wire around our minds, are not strengthened by their pain, but by our resistance. But when awareness says, "You are allowed to be here," even those thoughts loosen their grip. Even they, too, want to be seen. And once they are, they begin to unravel, not from force, but from kindness. Let the bed hold your weight, the moment hold your mind. In a quiet corner of the monastery, where the wind barely stirred and moonlight fell like silk across the wooden floors, a young monk lay restless on his mat. His body ached not from work, but from tension. His jaw clenched, his shoulders curled inward, his hands slightly curled into fists, even in rest. He didn't understand why he couldn't sleep. He had followed the schedule, recited his evening chants, done everything right. And still, sleep remained distant, like a door that would not open, no matter how gently he knocked. The elder monk passing by with a lantern, noticed the way the young monk's body strained even in stillness. He whispered through the open door, "You are lying down, but you have not arrived." The young monk sat up. "I don't know how to let go." The elder knelt beside him and placed his palm gently on the mattress. "This bed," he said, "was built to carry you, but it can only carry what is given to it. You must let it have your weight, and you must let the moment carry your mind." The words stayed with him like breath on the back of his neck. That night, the monk laid down again, but differently. He let his back press fully into the mat. He let the earth below take his weight, like a child leaning into a parent. He unclenched his hands. He stopped guarding the moment. And for the first time, he let his body fall, not in failure, but in trust. Then he turned to the mind. The runaway thoughts, the future regrets, the past rehearsals, and instead of chasing or fixing, he whispered inwardly, "Let this moment hold you. Not what comes next, not what came before, just the breath, just the air, just the now." In Buddhist teaching, we are reminded that peace is not found in effort, but in surrender. The bed is not a challenge, it is an invitation. The present moment is not an obstacle, it is a cradle, and both are waiting patiently for you to arrive. Let the bed carry your body without resistance. Let this breath be enough. Let your weight be held, not just physically, but completely. Because rest doesn't come when the mind is quiet. It comes when the self is no longer holding itself up. Fear fades in the presence of curiosity. In a temple surrounded by mountains that seemed to breathe with the mist, a young monk lived under the quiet weight of fear. It was not the kind that shouted or startled. It was the quiet kind, the creeping kind. Fear of failure, fear of what others might think, fear of the unknown path ahead. It clung to him, disguised as hesitation. He bowed perfectly, followed every ritual, spoke only when spoken to. But inside, he lived like a bird, afraid to leave its cage, even though the door had always been open. One day, the abbot noticed the monk avoiding a particular cave near the edge of the forest. "Why do you always walk the long path?" he asked. "There's something strange about that cave," the monk said. "It gives me a bad feeling." The abbot smiled. "Then go look inside." The young monk's eyes widened. "But what if there's something dark in there?" "Then you will see it clearly," the abbot replied. "And when something is seen clearly, it begins to lose its shape." Later that evening, heart pounding, the monk approached the cave. His breath quickened, his thoughts spun, but he stepped in. What he found was not a monster, not a shadow with teeth, but an empty space filled with old silence and faint echoes. The fear, so vivid in his imagination, had nowhere to live in the light of his attention. It began to dissolve. The next day, he walked the short path, and this time he looked into the cave not with dread, but with wonder. Buddhist teaching reminds us, fear grows in the dark, but it shrinks in the light of curiosity. When we turn toward fear with interest rather than resistance, something shifts. Curiosity says, "What is this, really?" It doesn't run. It looks. It asks, instead of assumes. And in doing so, it transforms the unknown from a threat into a teacher. Fear cannot survive when we stop hiding from it, but it doesn't require bravery the way we imagine. It simply requires presence and the willingness to see. Curiosity invites that presence. It opens the door, and when the door is open, fear often walks out on its own. The light has never left, only the eyes closed. In a temple carved from stone, hidden deep in the hills, where lanterns burned through the fog and silence lived in the walls, a young monk fell into despair. He had come seeking enlightenment, inner peace, the kind of stillness he had heard about in sacred texts, but after months of practice, he felt farther from light than ever. His meditations felt hollow, his mind cloudy. He whispered to himself each night, "Maybe I'm not meant for this. Maybe the light just isn't in me." One evening, the elder monk noticed the young man's lowered eyes and dim spirit. He asked him to join him in the old shrine at the back of the temple, one rarely used, always kept in darkness. They entered, and the elder handed the monk a candle. "Light it," he said. The young monk struck a match, and the flame leapt to life. The small room glowed with soft golden warmth, revealing statues, offerings, and carvings that had been hidden just seconds ago. "Did the room become sacred just now?" the elder asked. The monk looked around. "No, it always was." The elder smiled. "The light didn't enter, it was revealed." That night, the young monk sat in meditation, not to chase some distant state, but to uncover what was already present. The breath, the awareness, the gentle hum beneath thought. He closed his eyes not to escape the light, but to return to it. Not the kind that shines from lamps or stars, but the light of knowing, of being, of presence. Buddhist wisdom teaches that what we seek is not lost. It is simply unseen. The light of awareness, of clarity, of love. It does not flicker out. It gets buried beneath thought, beneath doubt, beneath the noise we mistake for truth. But it is never gone. You are not broken. You are not empty. You are not far from peace. The light has never left. Only the eyes closed. And when you grow still, when you soften into silence, you don't create the light. You simply open to it. And in that opening, everything begins to glow. Sleep is not escape. It is return. In a monastery, tucked between silent hills and starlit skies, a novice monk dreaded the moment the temple lights dimmed. While others welcomed the quiet, he feared it. To him, sleep was a kind of failure, a retreat from the work of self-improvement. He believed real practice only happened when awake, when striving, when polishing the mind. Sleep felt like stopping, like letting go of control. And, in a mind still clinging to effort, letting go felt dangerous. Each night he lay stiff on his mat, eyes closed but thoughts racing. I should be meditating more. I shouldn't feel this restless. I haven't done enough. He treated rest like a thing to conquer, and so it always fled from him. One evening the head monk asked him, "Why do you fight sleep as if it were the enemy?" The young monk hesitated. "Because I don't want to lose my path." The elder monk smiled gently. "Sleep is not where the path ends. It's where you remember you were never lost." That night, the young monk approached rest differently. He didn't force his body to still. He didn't grip his thoughts with shame. Instead, he lay down with the same reverence he brought to meditation. He breathed slowly. He whispered to himself, This is not escape. This is return. Return to the body. Return to the breath. Return to the quiet place that existed before striving ever began. And something opened, not with noise, but with warmth. He didn't fall asleep. He fell into sleep, like water sinking into earth. There was no resistance, no proving, only presence. Buddhist wisdom teaches that sleep is not the absence of awareness, it is the soft return to it. Not the shallow awareness of achievement or effort, but the deep awareness that lives beneath identity. Sleep, when entered with mindfulness, is not an escape from practice. It is part of it. It is the moment the mind steps aside and the body remembers its own wisdom. We do not vanish in sleep. We return to stillness, to being, to wholeness without effort. Sleep is the breath the mind cannot take for itself. It is the surrender that heals what thought cannot touch. Not because we escape the world, but because for once we stop running from ourselves. You are allowed to rest without guilt. In a monastery nestled between old cedar trees and gentle rivers, a young monk worked harder than anyone else. He swept before dawn, polished floors in silence, bowed lower and longer in the meditation hall. No one told him to do more, yet he carried a weight that no one else could see. Every time he stopped to rest, even for a breath, his mind whispered, "You should be doing more. You haven't earned stillness. Others are watching. You don't deserve peace yet." It was not the work that tired him, it was the guilt. One afternoon, the elder monk invited him to sit beside the koi pond. The elder reached into his robe and pulled out a stone, handing it to the young monk. "Hold this in your lap," he said. The young monk obeyed. "Now," said the elder, "rest your hands, close your eyes, breathe." The monk hesitated. "But I'm still holding something." The elder smiled. "Exactly." That night, the monk lay on his mat and realized that guilt is like that stone, small but heavy when clutched for too long. He understood for the first time that guilt didn't come from others. It came from within, from the false belief that rest must be justified, that quiet must be earned like a reward, that peace is something given only to the perfect. But the Buddha taught that peace is a birthright, not a paycheck. The moon does not ask if you've worked hard enough before it shines on your window. The wind does not check your to-do list before brushing your skin. Nature knows the truth. Rest is sacred, necessary, undeniable, not a weakness, not a luxury. In this moment, the breath rises and falls with or without permission. Your heart beats not because you deserve it, but because life moves through you. You do not need to apologize for needing rest. You do not need to earn the right to close your eyes. You are allowed to rest, not after everything is perfect, not once everyone approves, not when you've exhausted yourself. You are allowed to rest because you are alive. And that is reason enough. Awareness does not sleep, it watches peacefully. In a high forest monastery where the stars felt close enough to touch and the nights wrapped the mountains in silence, a young monk lay restless. Though his body ached for sleep, his mind refused. Each time he closed his eyes, thoughts pulled at him, unfinished tasks, memories that lingered, small anxieties dressed in loud voices. He feared he would lose control if he drifted off. that everything he worked so hard to understand would vanish in sleep. To him, falling asleep felt like falling away from his path. One night, after struggling again, he approached the head monk, who was lighting the last lantern before bed. "I keep trying to sleep," he whispered, "but I feel like I have to stay awake to be present. If I sleep, I disappear." The elder looked at the flame dancing in the lantern's glass. "Does the flame go out when you stop staring at it?" he asked. The young monk shook his head. "Awareness is like this flame," the elder said. "It does not need your effort to exist. It does not vanish when the body rests. It simply continues, quietly watching, even in stillness." That night, the young monk lay down without fighting sleep. He didn't force his thoughts to go. He didn't try to hold on to consciousness. Instead, he trusted that something deeper than the mind was still awake, that the witness beneath his thoughts was not dependent on his attention. And in that trust, sleep came, not as an ending, but as a soft unfolding. Buddhist wisdom teaches that true awareness is not noisy. It does not clench. It does not struggle. It watches gently, like the moon over a sleeping earth. Even in deep rest, awareness remains, not as thinking, not as doing, but as pure presence, untouched, unbothered. The mind may rest, the senses may pause, but the awareness that sees it all does not disappear. It simply stops trying. It becomes a soft field, wide and calm, and in that field, peace breathes. Sleep, then, is not the death of awareness. It is the place where awareness finally gets to rest in itself, without identity, without pressure, without noise, just watching, just being, just peace. Let the pain pass through. You are not its container. In a mountain temple where clouds rested low over the earth and bells echoed like whispers through stone, a young monk sat with sorrow lodged deep in his chest. It had no clear shape, no single cause. It was not fresh, but it was heavy, an ache that lived behind his ribs, showing up in quiet moments, in prayer, in silence. He told no one about it. Instead, he held it close. He believed that if he just bore it long enough, quietly enough, it might disappear. But the more he held it in, the more it seemed to grow, spreading like ink in water. The elder monk saw it in his posture, the way his shoulders curled inward like a bowl trying to hold too much. One morning, the elder approached him, carrying a large clay jar filled to the brim with water. Without a word, he handed it to the young monk and asked him to walk. The monk obeyed, but with every step the water spilled. The jar trembled in his arms burned from the weight. After a few paces, the elder gently said, "Now, open your hands." The jar slipped, tipped, and spilled across the stones, loud at first, then soft. The monk stood frozen, empty-handed, heart pounding. "That," said the elder, "is what pain does when you try to carry it too long. It leaks, it breaks, it wants release. You are not meant to hold it. You are meant to feel it and let it pass through." That evening, as the monk returned to his cushion, the pain came, just as it always did. But this time, he didn't brace. He didn't hold it in his chest like a secret. He breathed with it. He let it rise, let it move, let it whisper what it needed to say. And when it was ready, he let it go. In Buddhist teaching, pain is not the enemy. It is a visitor. Suffering deepens when we trap it inside, try to bottle it, try to wear it like identity. But pain, by its nature, wants to move. It is not asking for containment. It is asking for passage. You are not the wound. You are not the jar. You are the space pain passes through, not where it comes to live, but where it comes to leave. Let it tremble through your chest. Let the breath carry it forward. Let the soul exhale. You were never meant to carry it forever. The only place healing happens is now. In a monastery, nestled at the foot of misty mountains, where the air always smelled faintly of sandalwood and rain, a young monk carried a wound that time refused to close. It was not a cut on the skin, but a story in the heart, a mistake he had made before joining the temple. A cruel word spoken in anger, a friendship lost because of pride. And no matter how many mantras he whispered or how many prostrations he performed, he remained trapped by one echoing thought. I shouldn't have done that. Every time he sat to meditate, his mind fled backward. Every silence became a courtroom where he was both judge and accused, and the verdict never changed. One afternoon, while sweeping fallen leaves from the temple steps, the abbot approached and paused beside him. "You always clean the past," the elder said softly. "But what about the present?" The young monk didn't understand. The abbot gestured to the garden nearby. "A tree heals not by returning to the storm that broke it, but by growing in this season, right here, in this sunlight." That night, when the young monk sat in meditation, he did not chase the memory. He did not reach back in time to mend what was already gone. He simply brought his attention to the breath, to the feeling of his body resting, to the sounds of crickets in the darkness, and in that presence, something quiet and unexpected happened. Not forgiveness as a concept, but forgiveness as a sensation, not a fixing of the past, but a releasing of it. He realized healing was never waiting behind him. It was beneath him, in this breath, in this exact unfolding now. Buddhism teaches that the past cannot be relived, and the future cannot be controlled. Healing cannot occur in thoughts of yesterday or plans for tomorrow. It happens only in the living moment, where the wound is finally allowed to be seen, not judged, not buried, but met with attention. The mind may try to rewrite history or fast forward to a better self, but the body, the breath, the heart, they only live now. And now is where the kindness begins. Now is where the story changes, not by erasing what was, but by no longer feeding it with presence. The only place healing happens is now, because now is the only place that truly exists. You are not the story. You are the silence between sentences. In a quiet monastery, surrounded by ancient trees whose roots wound deep beneath the earth, a young monk wrestled with identity. Each time he sat in meditation, a flood of stories rushed in. I was the failure in my family. I am the one who made too many mistakes. I'm not spiritual enough, not strong enough, not whole enough. The voice in his head never stopped narrating who he was, who he wasn't, what he should become. He mistook the voice for himself. One afternoon during walking meditation, he confessed this to the elder monk. "My thoughts are so loud," he said. They tell me who I am every time I sit down to find peace, and I believe them." The elder paused beneath a tree whose leaves fell softly around them like slow rain. "You think the story is the truth," he said gently. "But have you ever listened to the space between the words?" The young monk frowned. "I don't understand." The elder smiled. "When a bell rings, do you only hear the sound, or do you feel the stillness that follows?" That night, the monk sat again. The stories returned. "You are not enough. You've wasted time. You've failed too many times to begin again." But this time, he noticed something different. After each thought, there was a pause, a breath, a stillness that the story did not touch. It was quiet, vast, alive, and it did not judge him. In Buddhist practice, we often mistake the mind's chatter for identity. The thoughts, the stories, the roles we've played, they feel solid, but they are clouds. The true self is not made of narrative. It is the sky beneath, the awareness that watches, holds, and never speaks in fear or judgment. The self is not the sentence, it is the silence. That silence is not empty. It is peace. It is presence. It is the part of you that existed before the world told you who to be. It has no name, no label, no timeline, and it cannot be harmed by the words that pass above it. You are not the character in the story. You are the pause between paragraphs, the space that holds the ink without being stained. And in that silence, you are already free. In this breath, all is forgiven. In a monastery shaded by the wide arms of ancient fig trees, a monk lived with quiet shame. Though his robes were clean and his practice sincere, he carried within him a guilt so old it had become part of his identity. Before temple life, he had lived recklessly, hurting those who trusted him, speaking words he could not unsay, turning his back on love out of fear. And though the world around him had changed, the story he told himself had not. You are the one who failed, the one who cannot be forgiven. Each morning he bowed low before the Buddha, but never allowed the bow to reach his own heart. His practice was sincere, but also sharp. He meditated with intensity, fasted often, served in silence, hoping, perhaps, that if he were good enough, he could cleanse what had already happened. One evening, the head monk sat beside him after the last bell. The night was cool, and the silence felt soft instead of heavy. "Tell me," the elder said, "where is that version of you now? The one you keep punishing?" The younger monk looked down. "Gone." The elder nodded. "Then why do you keep chasing him into the past? Come back. He's not here." That night, for the first time, the monk sat not to improve or prove himself, but to breathe. He placed a hand on his chest and felt the inhale rise, gentle and full. He felt the exhale fall, effortless and free. And as he did, a quiet realization bloomed, not from thinking, but from stillness. This breath has never asked what I've done. It has never withheld itself. It only gives. It only arrives. It only loves. In Buddhist teaching, forgiveness does not begin with a ritual. It begins with presence. When the mind stops clinging to the past, the heart opens. Not to excuse, but to release. Not to erase, but to allow what was to be held, without resistance. The breath does not care who you used to be. It only meets you where you are, fully, freely, now. And in this breath, not the next, not some day, but this one, all is forgiven. Not by the world, not by those you hurt, but by the deepest part of you that no longer needs to carry the weight. Release is not loss, it is flight. In a monastery built where the mountains touch the clouds and the wind whistles ancient songs through open windows, a monk sat holding tightly to a memory that would not let him go, or rather, that he would not let go. It was a love once cherished, a dream once nurtured, a version of life that never came to pass. Though years had passed since it slipped from his grasp, he still returned to it in thought, in longing, in quiet sorrow. Letting it go, he believed, would mean saying goodbye to a part of himself. It would mean losing something precious, something that once made him feel whole. The elder monk, having watched the quiet ache in the younger one's eyes, offered him a simple task. They climbed a high hill where wild birds gathered at sunrise. In the elder's hand was a small carved wooden bird, delicate and beautiful. He handed it to the young monk. "Throw it," he said. The monk hesitated. "But I'll lose it." The elder smiled. "It was never meant to stay in your hand." And so the monk, after a long breath, released it into the wind. It didn't fly, of course. It spun and tumbled through the air, landing softly in the grass far below. And yet, in that moment, something inside him soared. That night, during meditation, he no longer clung to the past like a sacred object. He let the memories rise, held them tenderly, then opened his hands. And as he let them fall away, not in anger, not in grief, but in reverence, he felt lighter, not emptier, just freer. Buddhist wisdom teaches that attachment is not love, it is fear. The fear that letting go means losing part of ourselves. But release is not abandonment. It is trust. It is saying, this no longer needs to stay to be real. Its beauty was not in its possession, but in its presence. When you release, you do not fall. You rise. You no longer carry what was never meant to be permanent. You allow space for what is to find you. Release is not the end of love. It is love maturing, expanding, taking new shape. It is not a collapse. It is flight. Stillness is the seed of all strength. In a monastery surrounded by wind-bent pines and the distant sound of mountain streams, a young monk grew frustrated with himself. Though he had been practicing for years, he still felt weak, easily shaken by criticism, overwhelmed by emotion, unsteady in the face of uncertainty. He admired those who never flinched, whose voices remained calm in chaos, whose eyes didn't flicker when storms rolled in. He thought strength meant control, toughness, action. And because he was quiet, because he often trembled inside, he believed he lacked what others had. One day, while splitting wood for the monastery's winter fire, he watched the elder monk sitting perfectly still beneath a tree, his back straight, eyes soft, unmoving for what seemed like hours. Later that evening, the young monk asked, "How do you stay so strong in silence? I always feel like I need to do something to be powerful." The elder smiled. "You mistake stillness for weakness. But the tallest tree begins with still roots. The river begins in still water. True strength doesn't erupt. It grows quietly, inwardly." That night, The monk sat on his mat differently, not to conquer restlessness, but to become still with it. When agitation rose, he didn't fight it. When emotion swelled, he didn't suppress it. He breathed through it, sat beside it, watched it rise and fall like clouds passing through open sky. And something shifted, not outside but within, not force but depth, not muscle but groundedness. The Buddha taught that strength is not the absence of struggle, but the presence of unwavering awareness. A strength that comes not from bracing, but from allowing. Not from domination, but from rootedness. The kind of power that doesn't need to shout, doesn't flinch when things fall apart, because it is anchored not in outcomes, but in presence. Stillness is not what you reach after becoming strong. Stillness is how strength begins. It is the breath that steadies the storm, the silence that listens instead of reacts, the pause before the wise word. It is the space within you that cannot be shaken, because it is not pretending. It is simply being. And every time you return to that stillness, even for a breath, you plant the seed of a strength the world cannot measure, not loud, not visible, but unshakable. Let your thoughts be clouds. Let yourself be sky. In a monastery perched on a cliff's edge, where the winds sang across the valleys and the sky stretched wider than the eye could follow, a young monk came to his teacher, overwhelmed. His mind was a storm, thoughts swirling, worries rising like waves, judgments crashing against one another. "I try to meditate," he said, "but I can't stop thinking. My thoughts are too loud, too many. I can't escape them." The elder monk said nothing. He led the young one outside and pointed upward. "What do you see?" he asked. "Clouds," the monk replied. "Do they disturb the sky?" The young monk looked again. The clouds moved quickly, dark and dense in places, soft and wispy in others, but the sky itself remained untouched, vast and unbothered. "No," he said slowly, "they don't." The elder nodded. "Your thoughts are like that. They come and go, but they are not you. You are the space they pass through." That night, the young monk returned to his cushion, not to silence the mind, but to witness it. When thoughts arose, "I'm not focused, I should be calmer. Why can't I stop this?" He watched them like drifting clouds. Some were stormy, others light, but all passed. None stayed. And beneath them, something greater remained. Awareness, spacious, silent, constant. The Buddha taught that we suffer not because thoughts appear, but because we cling to them, believe them, fight them, fear them. But thoughts are weather, not identity. They shift, they change, and they are not permanent. They are not the sky. You are not your worry. You are not your fear. You are not even your joy. You are the space behind them all. Let your thoughts be clouds. Let them pass without needing to chase, judge, or fix them. Let them float. Let them rain. Let them vanish. And rest in the knowing that beneath every thought, beneath every emotion, you are still here, open, vast, unshaken. The clouds cannot touch the sky. And neither can your thoughts touch who you truly are. The body rests when the heart is seen. In a temple cradled by hills where lavender bloomed in soft winds and the stones stayed warm from the sun, a monk could never quite relax. His body was always slightly tense, shoulders tight, fingers curled, jaw held. Even when he lay on his mat, his chest remained guarded, as though bracing for a blow that never came. He followed the rituals. He said the chants. But something inside stayed restless, clenched, unready to let go. One day, after evening meditation, the head nun watched him linger behind, rubbing his shoulders like he was trying to press something away. She walked over and placed a folded blanket around him, not as instruction, but as presence. She looked at him, not through him, and said softly, "You carry your body like it's under threat, but what is it protecting?" The monk's eyes filled, unprepared for the tenderness. "I don't know," he whispered. "I think it's trying to guard a heart that no one has really looked at." The elder nodded gently. "Then maybe that's why you can't rest. The body is waiting for the heart to be seen." That night, the monk sat with his hand over his chest, not to control the breath, not to force sleep, but to acknowledge the quiet ache he had kept hidden, the ache to be understood, even just once, without needing to explain. He whispered inwardly, "I see you. I see what hurts. I see what longs. You don't have to hide anymore." And slowly, the body began to soften, not because the mind silenced it, but because the heart no longer felt invisible. Buddhist wisdom tells us the body and heart are not separate. The tension in the shoulders, the tightness in the jaw, the ache in the back. These are not just physical echoes. They are emotional messages. They speak when the heart goes unheard. We often try to relax through techniques, posture, breath, silence, but true rest begins when the heart is witnessed, when its sorrow is allowed, when its longing is not dismissed, when its story is held with kindness instead of judgment. The body does not rest just when the mind goes quiet. It rests when the heart no longer needs to defend itself, and in that sacred noticing, the body exhales. Because finally, someone is home. The truth of you needs no fixing. In a monastery nestled between old stone walls and fields of soft grass, a young monk carried with him a quiet heaviness. He tried to hide it behind perfect posture, behind memorized chants and long hours of meditation. But inside he felt broken, too flawed, too messy, too human. Each day he woke with a silent mission. Fix yourself. Purify your thoughts. Be better than you are. He believed that enlightenment meant becoming someone else, someone quieter, calmer, more worthy. One afternoon, the elder monk found him scrubbing the floor long after the others had gone to rest. "Still cleaning?" the elder asked gently. "Yes," the young monk replied. "There's always more dirt." The elder paused, then knelt beside him and pointed to his reflection in the bucket of water. "When the water is still, do you see your face?" The monk nodded. "And when you stir it, do you see better or less?" "Less," the elder smiled. Sometimes trying to fix what isn't broken only clouds what is already clear. That night, the young monk sat on his cushion, weary of striving. He let the breath move without controlling it. He let the thoughts pass without labeling them good or bad. He let himself simply be as he was. And in that stillness, something remarkable happened. He saw the quiet truth beneath all his fixing. He had never been too much. He had never been too little. He had simply forgotten how to see himself without conditions. Buddhism teaches that our deepest self is not something to be improved. It is something to be revealed. The mind collects dust, stories, judgments, comparisons, but the heart beneath is already whole. It does not need polishing. It needs remembering. You are not a broken thing in need of repair. You are not a project. You are a presence. The truth of you is not found in perfection, but in the gentle awareness that arises when striving ends. You do not need to earn your way into being enough. You already are. The light you seek is not waiting in a future version of you. It's here, in the stillness, in the breath, in the part of you that never asked to be anything other than whole. Tonight, you are not behind. You are exactly where you belong. In a valley where fireflies danced over moonlit ponds and time felt slower than breath, a monk sat alone at the edge of the temple steps. He watched the stars flicker, his heart aching with a quiet shame. Earlier that day, he had seen the younger monks reciting sutras with ease, their posture perfect, their minds sharp. And he, older and slower, had forgotten a verse. He had bowed at the wrong time. He had smiled, but inside he had whispered, "I'm falling behind. I should be farther by now." The elder monk, who always moved like a breeze unnoticed until it spoke, sat beside him. He said nothing for a long time. Then, gently, he asked, "Behind what?" The younger monk hesitated. "Behind where I thought I'd be. Behind the others. Behind who I was supposed to become." The elder looked up at the stars. "Do you think that Firefly regrets not glowing yesterday, or that the moon scolds itself for not being full yet?" The monk smiled faintly, the shame in his chest loosening just enough for air to return. That night, as he lay on his mat, he did not measure himself against the past or the imagined future. He stopped judging the pace of his growth. He stopped comparing his chapter to someone else's page. He let go of the invisible race he had unknowingly been running, and in that letting go, something else rose up. Peace. A quiet understanding that this moment, right here, was not a delay. It was not a mistake. It was not a detour. It was home. The Buddha never taught that we should rush. He never asked us to compete with one another's enlightenment. He taught presence. He taught trust, that the flower blooms when it's ready, not when it's told, that the seed rests in darkness before the first crack of light. You are not behind. You are becoming. You are not late. You are unfolding. And tonight, there is nowhere else you need to be. No version of yourself to chase. No ladder to climb. No timeline to catch up with. Just this breath. Just this night. And it is enough. As this journey through Buddhist wisdom comes to a close, let the quiet truths you've heard settle deeper than thought, into the breath, into the bones, into the silence that asks for nothing. These teachings weren't meant to be mastered. They were meant to be remembered. That healing is not a straight path, but a spiral of grace. That you are not the storm, but the sky it moves through. That rest is not something you earn. It is something you are allowed. In each breath, you are guided back, not to some distant ideal, but to yourself. Still, whole, and enough. Tonight, you don't need to fix the past. You don't need to chase the future. You don't need to become anything. You only need to soften into what's already here. You are not broken. You are not behind. You are not your thoughts. You are the stillness between them, and from that stillness, sleep becomes not an escape, but a gentle return home. If any of these teachings touched your heart or helped ease your mind, leave a comment below. We'd love to hear what stayed with you. And if you'd like more moments of peace, presence, and clarity, don't forget to subscribe. There's always more light waiting in the silence.